Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's extended tale on Pillow Tale Studio, the channel where we're going to dive into some historical mysteries you've never heard before, hidden truths, and extraordinary discoveries. Before we get started, please take a moment to comment and let us know, where are you watching from? What time is it for you? And are you enjoying your day so far? If you haven't already, please subscribe to Pillow Tale Studio so you never miss another journey into the unknown. Now, let's get to the story. Story 1. The Pompeii Shadow Scrolls. The air hung thick with the scent of ash and salt as Dr. Elena Voss stepped off the boat onto the sun-scorched docks of the Bay of Naples. It was March 10, 2025. And the Italian coastline shimmered under a relentless sun, the waves lapping lazily against the ancient stones of Herculaneum. Elena adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, her hazel eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon where Mount Vesuvius loomed, its peak cloaked in a haze that felt more ominous than natural. She was no stranger to the whispers of history. Her career as an archaeologist had taken her from the windswept dunes of Egypt to the rain-soaked jungles of Guatemala, but this dig was different. This was personal. Elena's leather satchel bounced against her hip, heavy with notes and a single photograph. Her grandfather, Heinrich Voss, standing amid the ruins of Pompeii in 1948, his grin wide and his hands clutching a charred scroll fragment. He'd spent his life chasing a legend, the Shadow Scrolls, a collection of writings rumored to have been penned by a Roman seer named Lucius Cassius on the eve of Vesuvius's eruption in 79 AD. The scrolls, he claimed, held a prophecy so precise it foretold events centuries beyond the ash-choked streets of Pompeii. Scholars had dismissed him as a crackpot, but Elena had grown up on his stories, his voice trembling with conviction as he spoke of a vision that could rewrite history or end it. The call had come a week ago. A team excavating a villa in Pompeii's northeastern quadrant had uncovered a sealed chamber, its walls blackened but intact, its contents preserved beneath layers of volcanic pumice. Inside, they'd found a bronze chest etched with laurel leaves and a single Latin word, fatum, fatum. Elena had dropped everything, leaving her lecture hall at Columbia University mid-sentence to catch the next flight to Naples. Now, as she trudged up the dusty path to the dig site, her boots crunching on ancient gravel, she felt the weight of her grandfather's dream pressing against her chest. The villa was a marvel, even in ruin. Its frescoes, faded yet vivid, depicted scenes of Bacchus reveling with satyrs, their colors bleeding into the cracked plaster. The chamber itself was a small, airless cube, its walls lined with amphorae and a single stone table where the chest sat, glinting dully in the beam of Elena's flashlight. She knelt beside it, her gloved fingers tracing the word fatume. The lid creaked open with a groan, revealing a bundle of papyrus scrolls, their edges brittle but miraculously whole. Her breath caught as she unrolled the first, the Latin script stark against the fire-scorched surface. When the mountain wakes, the shadow speaks. 3 signs shall herald the end. The eagle falls, the sea turns red, and the sky weeps fire. Elena's pulse quickened. The words were cryptic, but they echoed the ramblings her grandfather had scribbled in his journals. She photographed the scroll and tucked it into her satchel, her mind racing. Was this a poetic lament for Pompeii's destruction or something more? She needed time and help to decipher it. That help arrived in the form of Marco Ricci, a wiry Italian historian with a mop of dark curls and a grin that suggested he knew more than he let on. He'd been assigned to assist her, though his casual demeanor sipping espresso while perched on a fallen column grated on her nerves. "You think this is it, huh?" he said, nodding at the chest. "The big mystery your nano chased? It's not a fairy tale," Elena snapped, brushing ash from her hands. "These scrolls survived for a reason." Marco shrugged. "Reason's one thing, truth's another. You know, the locals say this place is cursed. They hear voices in the wind, Cassius, begging to be freed." Elena rolled her eyes. but a chill prickled her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that the chamber was watching her, its silence too heavy, too alive. That night, hunched over a folding table in her tent, she pored over the scrolls with Marco, their translations revealing fragments of a larger prophecy. Lucius Cassius, it seemed, had been no ordinary seer, a freed slave turned priest of Apollo. He'd claimed divine visions in the days before Vesuvius erupted, scribbling his warnings as the sky darkened with ash. One passage stood out: "The shadow will rise when the third sign is fulfilled, and the world will kneel before the flame." The next morning, the dig site buzzed with tension. Word of the scrolls had leaked, drawing a swarm of reporters and a shadow Elena hadn't expected. A man in a tailored black suit lingered at the perimeter, his pale eyes fixed on her. She'd seen him before in Cairo, hovering near a dig she'd abandoned after threats from a shadowy group called the Order of the Saffron Veil. They were a secret society obsessed with controlling ancient knowledge, and Elena had no doubt they'd come for the scrolls. "Trouble," Marco muttered, nodding at the man. "That's Dario Vespasi, ex-military, now a fixer for whoever pays best. If he's here, the Order's not far behind." Elena's stomach twisted. She'd faced rival scholars and crumbling ruins, but the Order was a different beast, ruthless, resourceful, and rumored to dabble in rites older than Rome itself. She needed to move fast. With Marco's help, she smuggled the scrolls to a safe house in Naples, a crumbling apartment overlooking the bay. There, they pieced together more of Cassius's vision. The eagle could be a fallen empire Rome, perhaps, or America in modern times. The Red Sea hinted at a natural disaster, maybe a volcanic tide. But fire from the sky? That felt too vivid, too imminent. Their work was interrupted by a knock, sharp, insistent. Elena opened the door to find an old woman, her face creased like parchment, clutching a medallion etched with Apollo's lyre. "You've woken him," she rasped, her voice trembling. "Cassius. He speaks through the mountain. Leave the scrolls or the flame takes us all." Marco laughed, but Elena's hand tightened on the medallion. She dismissed the curse talk as superstition, yet the woman's words gnawed at her. That night, Vesuvius rumbled, a low growl that shook the windows and sent ash drifting over the city. The news reported seismic activity unusual, but not unprecedented. Elena wasn't so sure. Days blurred into a frantic chase for answers. Elena and Marco tracked down a lead in the Vatican archives, where a 16th century monk had referenced a Pompeian oracle tied to apocalyptic omens. The monk, Fra Giovanni, had been excommunicated for claiming Cassius's prophecy predicted the fall of Christendom. His notes pointed to a second chest, buried in Herculaneum, that held the key to silencing the shadow or unleashing it. The Order closed in. Dario ambushed them on a rain-slicked road near Mount Vesuvius, his men pinning Marco against a wall while Elena clutched the scrolls, her heart pounding. "Give them up," Dario hissed, his knife glinting. "You don't know what you're meddling with." "I know enough," Elena shot back, kicking free and bolting into the night with Marco. They reached Herculaneum at dawn, the air thick with sulfur. The second chest lay beneath a collapsed bathhouse, its lid engraved with a sunburst. Inside was a single scroll, its text glowing faintly under Elena's flashlight. "The shadow is bound by the lyre's song. Sing or burn." A melody drifted through her mind, her grandfather's lullaby, a tune he'd claimed came from Pompeii's ruins. She hummed it, her voice shaky, and the ground stilled. Marco stared, wide-eyed, as the scroll's glow faded. But the calm was fleeting. Vesuvius roared again, louder, and the sky darkened with a crimson haze. Elena's phone buzzed a news alert. Red tide spotted off Naples coast. 2 signs down. 1 to go. Dario's shadow loomed behind them, his smile cold. The Order wasn't done, and neither was Cassius. Elena clutched the medallion, her mind racing. Was this prophecy a warning or a weapon? She wouldn't stop until she knew. even if it meant facing gods and monsters buried beneath the ash. Elena's boots sank into the ashy soil of Herculaneum as she and Marco stumbled away from the bathhouse, the second scroll tucked inside her satchel alongside the medallion. The air was stifling now, laced with a metallic tang that stung her throat. Vesuvius's growl had subsided to a low hum, but the crimson haze staining the sky felt like a bruise spreading over the world. She glanced at Marco, his face smudged with dirt, and his usual smirk replaced by a grim line. "You still think this is a fairy tale?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He wiped sweat from his brow, his dark eyes flickering to the mountain. "I think we're in over our heads, Elena. That song you stopped something, or started it." She didn't answer. The lullaby still echoed in her mind, its notes threading through her grandfather's stories of Pompey's lost voices. She'd always thought it was just a tune he'd picked up, a fragment of folklore. Now, it felt like a key one she didn't fully understand. The scroll's words burned in her memory. The shadow is bound by the lyre's song. Sing or burn, Apollo's lyre, Cassius's god. Was she meant to keep singing, or was there more to the ritual? Before she could process it, a sharp crack split the air. Dario Vespasi emerged from the ruins, flanked by two figures cloaked in saffron robes, their faces hidden behind veils. The Order of the Saffron Veil had found them. Dario's pale eyes glinted with a predator's calm, his knife twirling lazily in his hand. "You're stubborn, Dr. Voss," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "But you're out of time. Hand over the scrolls, and maybe you walk away." Elena tightened her grip on the satchel. "You don't even know what they say." "I don't need to," he replied, stepping closer. "The Order does. They've waited centuries for this. Cassius's vision belongs to them." Marco edged forward, his fists clenched. "You're just a hired thug, Vespasi. What's in it for you?" Dario's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Power, Ricci. The kind that reshapes the world." He nodded to the robed figures, who began to chant a low, guttural sound that made the ground tremble. Elena's skin prickled as the air grew heavy, the crimson haze thickening into a fog that swallowed the ruins. "Run!" she shouted, grabbing Marco's arm. They bolted through the labyrinth of Herculaneum's streets, the chant echoing behind them like a tide. The fog clung to their clothes, its edges shimmering with faint shapes, human forms, their mouths open in silent screams. Elena's heart hammered. Were these the shades of Pompey's dead, stirred by the Order's ritual? Or something worse? They ducked into a crumbling atrium, its mosaic floor cracked but still gleaming with scenes of Apollo slaying the python. Elena pressed her back against a column, her breath ragged. "They're waking the shadow," she whispered. "The prophecy, it's not just words, it's alive." Marco peeked through a gap in the wall, his face pale. "They're spreading out. We can't stay here." She nodded, her mind racing. The medallion felt warm in her pocket, its lyre etching pulsing faintly against her fingers. She pulled it out, studying the worn bronze. "The song stopped the tremor," she said. "Maybe it can stop them too." Marco raised an eyebrow. "You're betting our lives on a hunch? Got a better idea?" He didn't. She took a deep breath and hummed the lullaby again, her voice soft but steady. The notes rose, weaving through the atrium, and the fog recoiled, the shapes within it dissolving like smoke. The chanting faltered, and a frustrated shout Dario's cut through the silence. Elena kept singing, her pitch rising, until the medallion flared with a golden light, its glow spilling across the mosaic. The floor shuddered, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Marco stared. "You've got to be kidding me." "It's a way out," Elena said, pocketing the medallion. "Or a way in. Either way, we're going." The stairs spiraled down into a tunnel carved from volcanic rock, its walls slick with moisture and etched with Latin graffiti prayers to Apollo, pleas for mercy. The air grew colder, the scent of sulfur fading into something older, earthier. Elena's flashlight beam danced across the stone, catching glints of crystal embedded in the walls. At the tunnel's end stood a circular chamber, its ceiling domed and painted with a starfield that mimicked the night sky over Pompeii in 79 AD. In the center rested a stone altar, its surface stained with ancient blood and cradling a third bronze chest. Elena's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside lay a single parchment, its script bolder than the others, as if written in haste. The shadow walks when the flame is free. 3 keys bind its song, blood and star. Fail, and the world burns anew. Beneath the text was a crude map, its lines tracing a path from Herculaneum to a spot deep within Vesuvius's crater. 3 keys, Marco muttered, reading over her shoulder. The song's yours, blood whose, and star? Elena traced the map with her finger. The star could be literal in alignment, like the one Cassius saw, or something hidden in the crater. We need to find it. A distant rumble shook the chamber, dust sifting from the ceiling. The order wasn't far behind. Elena stuffed the scroll into her satchel, her resolve hardening. We're not done yet. Cassius saw something worth dying for. I want to know what. They climbed back to the surface, emerging into a world transformed. The crimson fog had spread, curling over Naples like a shroud, and the sea beyond glowed an unnatural red, its waves sluggish and thick. Fishermen shouted from the docks, their nets tangled with dead fish and streaks of blood. The second sign, Elena's stomach churned. The prophecy was unfolding, and they were running out of time. Marco pointed to the mountain. The crater's a day's hike. If the order gets there first. They won't, Elena cut in, her voice fierce. She'd spent her life chasing shadows her grandfather's, histories, her own. Now, she'd face the real thing. As they set out, Vesuvius loomed larger, its peak wreathed in clouds that flickered with orange light. The medallion thrummed against her chest, and the lullaby played on a loop in her mind. Behind them, Dario's silhouette appeared on the horizon, his saffron-clad allies fanning out like wolves. Ahead, the crater waited a gaping maw of stone and secrets. The sky flickered, a single ember drifting down like a tear. The trail to Vesuvius's crater was a brutal ascent, a jagged scar of black rock and loose scree that clawed at Elena's boots. The wind howled, carrying flecks of ash that stung her face like tiny wasps. Marco trudged beside her, his breath puffing in short bursts, his usual quips silenced by the mountain's oppressive weight. Above them, the sky churned, a roiling mass of gray streaked with veins of orange, as if the heavens were bleeding fire. Elena's satchel slapped against her thigh, the scrolls and medallion inside a constant reminder of the stakes. The third sign was close. She could feel it in the tremor of the earth, the pulse of the air. They'd been climbing for hours, the crimson fog thickening below, until Naples vanished beneath its shroud. The Red Sea lapped at the coast, a grotesque mirror of Cassius's prophecy, and now the sky wept embers sparks that ignited patches of dry scrub and left trails of smoke curling upward. Elena's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the shadow scrolls. Song, blood, and star. The lullaby had opened the tunnel and stilled the mountain once. Blood perhaps a sacrifice, a ritual tied to the altar's stains. But the star? She scanned the horizon, hoping for a celestial clue, but the clouds obscured everything. Marco stumbled, catching himself on a boulder. "Elena, look," he rasped, pointing ahead. Through the haze, a shape emerged, a jagged rim of stone, encircling the crater, its edges glowing faintly with an unnatural light. The air thrummed, a deep vibration that rattled her teeth. They'd reached the heart of Vesuvius. The crater was a vast, steaming pit, its walls striated with layers of ancient lava, its floor a chaos of cracked earth and bubbling pools. In the center stood a monolith, a towering slab of obsidian, its surface etched with spiraling runes that pulsed like veins. Elena's flashlight beam caught the glint of something embedded at its base, a star-shaped indentation, the size of her medallion. Her heart leapt. "That's it," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. The third key. Before they could move, a shadow fell across the crater. Dario Vespasi stepped onto the rim, his black suit pristine despite the ash, his saffron-robed companions fanning out behind him. Their chants resumed, louder now, a guttural hymn that made the monolith's runes flare brighter. "You're too late," Dario called, his knife gleaming in the ember-lit gloom. "The shadow rises tonight." Elena clutched the medallion, its warmth searing her palm. "Not if I stop it," she shouted back, breaking into a run toward the monolith. Marco followed, dodging a robed figure who lunged at him with a curved blade. The air crackled with energy, the ground quaking as Vesuvius growled awake. Elena reached the stone, her fingers fumbling to fit the medallion into the star-shaped slot. It clicked into place, and the runes blazed gold, a wave of heat washing over her. She sang the lullaby again, her voice trembling but clear, the notes cutting through the order's chant. The monolith shuddered, and a seam split its surface, revealing a hollow chamber within. Inside lay a crystal orb, its facets shimmering with trapped light, a star captured in glass. Elena grabbed it, its weight surprising in her hands, and the crater stilled for a heartbeat. Then the sky erupted. Embers became flames, raining down in a torrent that scorched the earth. The third sign. Elena's breath caught as the orb pulsed, its light syncing with her song. The prophecy's words echoed in her mind. The shadow walks when the flame is free. Had she unbound it, or was this her chance to bind it? Dario charged, his knife aimed at her throat. Marco tackled him, the two men tumbling into the ash as the robed figures closed in. Elena clutched the orb, her song faltering. Blood, the second key. She remembered the altar in the tunnel, its stains a silent demand. Without thinking, she pressed her palm to the monolith's edge, a sharp ridge slicing her skin. Crimson dripped onto the stone, and the orb flared, its light swallowing the flames overhead. The crater shook violently, a deafening roar rising from its depths. The fog below swirled upward, forming a figure, a towering silhouette of ash and shadow, its eyes twin coals of fire, Cassius's shadow. It loomed over the crater, its presence a weight that crushed the air from Elena's lungs. The order's chants turned to screams as the figure turned toward them, its form rippling with rage. "Elena," Marco yelled, wrestling free of Dario. "What did you do?" "I don't know," she shouted, her voice raw. The orb burned in her hands, its light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She sang again, louder, pouring every ounce of will into the lullaby. The shadow paused, its head tilting as if listening, and the flames overhead dimmed. But it didn't retreat. It stepped forward, its footfall cracking the crater's edge. And Elena realized the truth. The keys didn't bind it, they woke it. Dario staggered to his feet, his face twisted with triumph. "You've done it, Voss. The Order thanks you." He raised a hand, and the robed figures resumed their chant, their voices bending the shadow toward Elena. It reached for her, its fingers trailing ash, and she stumbled back, the orb slipping from her grasp. It hit the ground, fracturing into shards that scattered like stars. The shadow froze, then howled a sound that split the sky. The flames reignited, a curtain of fire descending as Vesuvius erupted in earnest, spewing molten rock into the air. Elena grabbed Marco, dragging him toward the crater's rim. As the ground buckled, the shadow dissolved into the chaos, its form swallowed by the inferno, but its presence lingered, a whisper in the wind. They slid down the mountainside, ash choking their lungs, the world a blur of heat and ruin. Below, Naples glowed red, the sea boiling under the onslaught. Elena's satchel was gone, lost in the crater, but the medallion hung around her neck, its lyre cold against her skin. She'd stopped nothing. She'd unleashed it. Marco coughed, his eyes wide. What now? Elena stared at the burning horizon, the prophecy's final words ringing in her ears. F fail, and the world burns anew. The shadow was free, and the order had won, but the lullaby still lived in her throat, and the mountain hadn't claimed her yet. "We fight," she said, her voice steel. "We find another way." The descent from Vesuvius was a nightmare of sliding ash and searing heat, the mountain's fury chasing Elena and Marco down its slopes. Lava bombs streaked through the sky, crashing into the earth with thunderous booms, while the air thickened with smoke that clawed at their lungs. Elena's legs burned, her vision blurring as she stumbled over jagged rocks, Marco's hand gripping her arm to keep her upright. The medallion bounced against her chest, its cold weight an anchor in the chaos. Behind them, the crater glowed like a forge, the shadow's howl still echoing in her ears. They hit the base of the mountain as dawn broke, a sickly orange light filtering through the haze. Naples sprawled below, half buried in ash, its streets choked with fleeing cars and panicked screams. The Red Sea churned, waves crashing against the docks with unnatural force, while plumes of fire danced across the horizon. Elena's stomach twisted. This wasn't just an eruption, it was the prophecy unfolding. A world burning anew, and she'd lit the match. Marco coughed, wiping soot from his face. "We can't stay here. The order's still out there, and that thing," he gestured vaguely at the mountain, where the shadow's presence lingered like a stain on the sky. Elena nodded, her mind racing. The orb was gone, shattered, but the song and the medallion remained. Blood had awakened the shadow her blood, but the prophecy's keys were incomplete. Song, blood, and star. The star had been the orb, or so she'd thought. Maybe she'd misread it. Maybe there was still a chance to bind what she'd unleashed. "We need answers," she said, her voice rough. The Vatican fraud Giovanni's notes. He knew more than he wrote. If there's a way to stop this, it's there. Marco stared at her, incredulous. "Rome? With Othat after us?" He pointed at the sky, where embers swirled like a swarm of locusts. "We don't have a choice," she snapped. "The Order wanted this. They'll know how to control it. We beat them to it, or we're all ash." He muttered something in Italian, probably a curse, but followed as she limped toward the coast. They scavenged a battered motorcycle from an abandoned garage, its engine sputtering to life as they roared north. The road was a graveyard of stalled cars and ash-drifted bodies, the air alive with sirens and distant explosions. Elena clung to Marco's waist, the medallion digging into her sternum, her mind replaying the shadow's howl. It hadn't attacked her, it had hesitated. Why? The journey to Rome was a blur of checkpoints and detours, the Italian countryside unraveling under Vesuvius's wrath. By the time they reached the Eternal City, the sky was a bruised purple, the Tiber reflecting flickers of fire. The Vatican loomed ahead, its domes shrouded in haze, its gates guarded by Swiss guards who eyed them warily. Elena flashed her Columbia ID and a half-true story about urgent research, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. They let her through, though their glances lingered on the ash streaking her clothes. The Vatican archives were a labyrinth of hushed corridors and ancient shelves, the air cool and heavy with the scent of parchment. A young archivist, Father Lorenzo, led them to Fra Giovanni's records, his brow furrowing as Elena explained her request. The monk was a heretic, he warned, handing her a leather-bound ledger. His writings were sealed for a reason. "Then unseal them," she said, her tone brooking no argument. Lorenzo hesitated, then nodded, disappearing into the stacks. The ledger was a mess of Latin scrawls and frantic sketches volcanoes, shadowed figures, a lyre, encircled by stars. Fra Giovanni had transcribed Cassius's prophecy, but his notes went further, detailing a ritual to silence the flame. The shadow craves the song, but blood calls it forth. The true star is not of earth, but of the heavens, a light to blind the dark, a star from the sky, an alignment. Elena's pulse quickened. She flipped to a star chart dated August 79 ad. The night Vesuvius erupted. A constellation, Lyra, had blazed over Pompeii, its brightest star, Vega, a beacon in the chaos. Marco leaned over her shoulder. Lyra, Apollo's lyre, the medallion. It's a map, Elena finished, tracing the constellation's shape on the bronze. The song ties it together, but we need the star's light. If Vega aligns again. Lorenzo returned, his face pale. You're not the first to ask for this today. Men in saffron robes came an hour ago. They took Giovanni's star charts. Elena's blood ran cold. The order was ahead of them. She thanked Lorenzo and dragged Marco out, the ledger tucked under her arm. Outside, street, Peter's Square was eerily quiet. The faithful gathered in prayer as ash drifted down like snow. She checked her phone March 11, 2025. An astronomy app confirmed it. Vega would peek over Rome in 2 nights, a rare alignment mirroring 79 AD. The Order would use it. She had to get there first. They raced to an observatory on the outskirts of Rome, a domed relic run by an old friend of Elena's, Dr. Sofia Bianchi. Sofia's graying hair was tied back, her eyes sharp, despite the exhaustion lining her face. "You're insane," she said, peering at the ledger. "But you're right. Vega's alignment is tomorrow night. If your prophecy's tied to it, you'll need a clear view and power." "Power?" Marco asked. Sophia tapped the medallion. "This isn't just a trinket. It's a conductor. Amplify the song through it, under Vega's light, and maybe you'll get your miracle." The next day was a frantic scramble, dodging Order agents who prowled the city, their saffron robes a stark contrast to the gray ash. Elena and Marco rigged a makeshift amplifier with Sophia's help, wiring the medallion to a speaker system atop the observatory. As night fell, Vesuvius's rumble reached Rome, a distant thunder that shook the ground. The shadow was moving, its presence a ripple in the haze spreading north. At midnight, Vega burned overhead, a pinpoint of brilliance in the fire-streaked sky. Elena stood on the observatory roof, the medallion glowing in her hands, the amplifier humming. Marco watched the horizon, where saffron figures crept closer, Dario's silhouette among them. "Now or never," he muttered. Elena sang. The lullaby poured from her, raw and fierce, the medallion flaring as the sound echoed across the city. Vega's light seemed to bend, a shaft piercing the haze and striking the bronze. The ground quaked, and the shadow rose a colossus of ash and flame, towering over Rome. Its eyes locked on Elena, and she faltered, the song catching in her throat. Dario laughed, his voice cutting through the wind. "You can't stop it, Voss. You're its herald." The shadow lunged, and Elena's world narrowed to the medallion's glow, the star's light, and the blood pounding in her veins. The shadow's claw of ash and flame loomed over Elena, its heat searing the air as it descended. Her voice wavered, the lullaby fracturing under the weight of its presence. But she dug deep, clutching the medallion as Vega's light pulsed through it. The amplifier roared, magnifying her song into a wave that rippled across Rome's rooftops, a melody of defiance and hope. The shadow froze, its fiery eyes flickering, and for a moment, Elena saw something within them, not rage, but recognition, a spark of humanity buried in the dark. Marco shouted her name, his voice nearly lost in the wind as Dario and the saffron-robed figures breached the observatory's perimeter. Knives glinted, and Sophia swung a wrench at an assailant, buying time. Elena's gaze darted between the shadow and the Order, her mind racing. This wasn't just about stopping a prophecy, it was about understanding it. Cassius hadn't written to destroy, he'd warned to save. The shadow wasn't a monster. It was a guardian, twisted by time and the Order's greed. She changed the song. The lullaby softened, its notes weaving a plea instead of a command, a call to the man. Cassius had been a seer, a priest, a soul trapped in ash. The medallion flared brighter, Vega's light bending into a halo around her. The shadow shuddered, its form collapsing inward, shrinking until it was no longer a colossus but a figure tall, robed, its face obscured by a veil of smoke. It spoke, its voice a rasp of centuries. "You sing my song, child of the lyre." "Why?" Elena's throat tightened, but she held its gaze. "To free you, to end this. What are you guarding?" The figure tilted its head, embers drifting from its form. "The truth. The flame is life, not death. It gestured to the order seek to wield it, to burn and rule. I was bound to stop them, but blood woke me too soon." Dario lunged, his knife aimed at Elena's back, but Marco tackled him, pinning him to the roof. The saffron figures hesitated, their chants faltering as the shadow turned toward them. Elena stepped closer, her song steadying. The Keys song, "Blood, Star, they're not to destroy you. They're to release you, aren't they?" The figure nodded, its form fraying. "Blood called me. Song holds me. The star." It pointed to Vega, then to the shattered orb's remnants in her memory. "The star is time. When it aligns, I can rest or rise. You choose." Elena's breath caught. The prophecy wasn't an end, it was a crossroads. The order had twisted it, craving power, but Cassius had seen a choice: let the shadow burn the world clean or guide it back to silence. Her blood had stirred it, her song had tamed it, and now Vega's light offered a path. She glanced at Marco, bloodied but alive, at Sophia, defiant with her wrench, and at Rome, trembling under the ash. This wasn't her burden alone. "Rest," she said, her voice firm. "You've guarded long enough." The shadow sighed a sound like wind through ruins, and reached for the medallion. Its fingers brushed hers, cold yet gentle, and the bronze dissolved into light, merging with Vega's beam. The figure unraveled, ash scattering into the night, and the sky cleared, flames fading as Vesuvius's roar softened to a murmur. The ground stilled, the Red Sea calming below. Dario snarled, thrashing under Marco's grip. "You've ruined it! The flame was ours!" Elena knelt beside him, her hazel eyes steady. "It was never yours, it was his." She nodded to the vanishing shadow, then stood as Sophia bound Dario's hands with a cable. The remaining order members fled, their saffron robes swallowed by the dark. Dawn broke over Rome, a golden glow washing away the haze. The city stirred, voices rising in relief as the ash settled. Elena leaned against the observatory railing, exhaustion sinking into her bones. Marco joined her, his grin returning. "You're a lunatic, you know that." She smiled faintly. "Runs in the family." Sophia approached, holding the ledger. Cassius wasn't wrong. The flame life, energy, it's in everything. He saw it could destroy or heal. You chose healing. Elena nodded, her thoughts drifting to her grandfather. He'd chased a dream, not of doom, but of meaning. She'd found it, not in scrolls or stars, but in the act of choosing hope over fear, rest over ruin. The days that followed were a quiet rebirth. Vesuvius slept, its crater a scar of black stone under a blue sky. Naples emerged from the ash, its people rebuilding with a resilience born of centuries. Elena stood on the observatory roof one last time, the ledger in her hands, Marco and Sophia beside her. The medallion was gone, its purpose fulfilled, but its song lingered in her heart, a reminder that even in the darkest prophecies, there was room for light. She didn't return to Colombia right away. Instead, she stayed in Italy, working with Sophia to catalog the Shadow Scrolls as remnants, sharing Cassius's truth with the world, not as a warning, but as a story of choice. The order faded into whispers. Dario's fate left to the courts, their power broken by a song and a star. Marco took to calling her the Liar of Pompeii, a teasing title she secretly loved. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena walked the ruins of Pompeii alone. The air was cool, the streets silent, but she felt no fear. She hummed the lullaby, soft and sure, and the wind carried it through the stones. Somewhere, Cassius rested, his burden lifted, his vision understood. The world hadn't burned anew, it had been given a chance to mend. She thought of her grandfather, his photograph now framed in her tent. He'd been right. History wasn't just bones and ash. It was a conversation, a thread connecting past to present, a chance to listen and choose. Elena smiled, the weight of the mystery replaced by a quiet strength. The shadow was gone, but its lesson remained. Life was the flame, fragile and fierce, and it was theirs to tend. Story 2. The Forgotten Ruins of Göbekli-Tepe. The wind howled across the barren hills of southeastern Turkey, tugging at Dr. Evelyn Carter's scarf as she crouched beside a jagged stone pillar, her gloved fingers brushing against carvings older than history itself. Göbekli-Tepe loomed around her, a sprawling enigma of T-shaped monoliths, thrust skyward like the bones of some forgotten giant, their surfaces etched with foxes, scorpions, and serpents frozen in eerie dance. At 12,000 years old, this wasn't just a ruin, it was a riddle, predating Stonehenge, the pyramids, even the invention of writing. Evelyn, a wiry archaeologist with a mop of chestnut hair and eyes that gleamed with relentless curiosity, had spent years chasing whispers of its secrets. Now, beneath a sky bruised purple by dusk, she felt the weight of something extraordinary pressing down on her. It started with a chipped limestone shard she'd unearthed that morning. Half buried in the reddish soil near Enclosure D, the fragment bore a spiral of symbols, sharp, angular runes unlike anything cataloged in the site's sprawling archive. They weren't pictographs of animals or hunters, but something deliberate, almost mathematical, pulsing with intent. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she traced them with her fingertip, her breath fogging in the chilly November air. She'd seen similar markings in a smuggled photo years ago, a grainy image from a private collector in Istanbul, dismissed as a hoax by her peers. But here they were, real and raw, carved by hands that hadn't touched daylight in 12 millennia. "Evelyn, you're gonna freeze out here," came a gruff voice behind her. She glanced up to see Mehmet, her Turkish guide and friend, trudging up the slope with a lantern swinging in his meaty hand, his weathered face, framed by a salt and pepper beard, creased with concern. A former shepherd turned site assistant, Mehmet had a knack for spotting trouble and a stubborn loyalty that kept him by her side through 3 seasons of digs. The team's packing up, storms rolling in. "Give me 5 minutes," she muttered, not looking up. "This isn't like the others, Mehmet. It's intentional. A code. Maybe." He snorted, planting the lantern beside her. "You said that about the boar carving last week. Turned out to be lunch scratches." She shot him a glare, but her lips twitched into a half smile. "This is different. Look at the precision. It's not decorative, it's functional." Mehmet squinted at the shard, his brows knitting. Looks like something my grandmother would have cursed at. You think it's trouble?" Before she could answer, a shadow flickered across the pillar, a sharp, unnatural movement that made her breath catch. The wind hadn't shifted, yet the air thickened, heavy with the scent of wet stone and something metallic, like blood. She stood, clutching the shard, her eyes darting across the enclosure. The monoliths seemed to lean inward, their carved beasts glaring down with sudden menace. A low hum vibrated through the ground, faint but rising, thrumming in her bones. "Mehmet, do you feel that?" she whispered. He nodded slowly, his hand drifting to the knife at his belt, like the earth's waking up. "We should go." A scream cut him off, sharp and human, echoing from the dig's eastern edge. Evelyn's heart lurched as she grabbed the lantern and bolted toward the sound, Mehmet close behind. They stumbled over loose stones and trenches, the hum growing louder, until they reached a cluster of tents where the crew had been cataloging finds. The scene was chaos, tables overturned, papers scattered, and a figure sprawled in the dirt. Salim, the wiry undergrad from Ankara University, his face pale and his chest heaving. "Salim," Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his trembling frame. What happened? His eyes, wide and glassy, locked onto hers. The pillars. They moved. I saw its shadows. Like men, but not men. They took it. Took what? Mehmet demanded, scanning the darkening horizon. The tablet, Salim rasped. The big one we found yesterday. It's gone. Evelyn's stomach twisted. The tablet, a slab of limestone etched with faint runes, uncovered beneath a collapsed wall, had been their biggest find yet. She'd barely begun studying it, but its weight and craftsmanship had hinted at something monumental. Now it was missing, and the air buzzed with an energy that prickled her skin. Stay with him, she told Mehmet, rising with the shard still clutched in her hand. I'm checking the enclosure. Evelyn. No, he started, but she was already moving, driven by a mix of fear and exhilaration she couldn't name. The hum swelled as she retraced her steps, the lantern casting jittery pools of light across the stones. The pillars loomed taller now, their shadows stretching impossibly long, and the carvings seemed to writhe in the flickering glow snakes coiling, birds taking flight. She reached the spot where she'd found the shard, and her breath caught. The soil was disturbed, clawed open like something had erupted from below. Then she saw it, footprints, barefoot and deep, leading toward a low mound she'd dismissed as natural weeks ago. The mound's surface shimmered faintly, rippling like heat haze, and the hum spiked into a drone that rattled her teeth. She stepped closer, the shard warm in her grip, and the air parted like a curtain. Beyond it stretched a tunnel rough-hewn, ancient, its walls studded with more runes that glowed a sickly green. Her rational mind screamed to turn back, but the archaeologist in her, the part that had chased mysteries from Cairo to Cusco, pushed her forward. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing damp and thick with the musk of earth and decay. Her lantern flickered, casting jagged shadows that danced like specters. The runes pulsed brighter, their patterns echoing the shard's spiral, and she realized with a jolt that they weren't random, they formed a sequence. A map or a warning, spiraling towards some unseen center. Her boots crunched on bone fragments. Animal, she told herself, though the shapes looked too human for comfort. After what felt like hours but couldn't have been more than minutes, the tunnel opened into a chamber vast enough to swallow the light. Pillars ringed the space, their tops lost in shadow, and at the center stood a dais of black stone, its surface slick with moisture. The stolen tablet rested there, its runes blazing like embers, but it wasn't alone. Figures moved around it, tall, gaunt, their forms shimmering between flesh and shadow, their eyes hollow pits that burned with cold fire. Evelyn froze, her breath shallow, as one turned toward her, its head tilting with an insect-like curiosity. Who dares? It rasped, its voice a chorus of whispers scraping her mind. The seal is broken. She clutched the shard tighter, her voice trembling but defiant. I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter. This is my dig. What are you? The figure glided closer, its form solidifying into a mockery of a man's skin like cracked clay, limbs too long, fingers tipped with claws. We are the Watchers, it said, bound by the builders to guard the spiral. You have brought the key. Her eyes flicked to the shard, its warmth now a searing heat. This, it's just a fragment. It is the lock, another voice hissed, this one from behind her. She spun to see more shadows coalescing, their numbers swelling. The spiral turns. The reckoning comes. Before she could process the words, a shout echoed through the chamber. Mehmet, charging in with his knife drawn, Salim staggering behind him, clutching a crowbar. Evelyn, get back, Mehmet roared, slashing at the nearest watcher. The blade passed through it like smoke, but the creature recoiled, hissing. Fools, the first watcher snarled. The cycle cannot be stopped. The tablet flared, its light blinding, and the chamber shook as cracks splintered the dais. Evelyn stumbled, the shard slipping from her hand, and skittering toward the tablet. The moment it touched the slab, the runes aligned, and a sound like a thunderclap split the air. The floor buckled, revealing a pit that yawned into darkness, its edges swirling with a vortex of dust and shadow. The watchers shrieked, their forms unraveling, but one lunged at her, claws outstretched, and then a hand yanked her back. Not Mehmet's, but a woman's, slender and strong, her face half hidden by a hood. "Not yet," the stranger said, her voice low and melodic, tinged with an accent Evelyn couldn't place. She hurled a vial of shimmering liquid into the pit, and the vortex faltered, the watchers dissolving into ash. "Who are you?" Evelyn demanded, breathless, as Mehmet and Salim flanked her. The woman lowered her hood, revealing sharp features and eyes like polished obsidian. "Call me Layla. I've been tracking this place longer than you've been alive." She nodded at the shard, now fused to the tablet. "You've started something you can't finish alone." The pit stabilized, but the air still thrummed with menace. Evelyn stared at the tablet, its runes shifting into new patterns, dates, constellations, a countdown etched in stone. "What is it?" she whispered. "A prophecy," Layla said grimly. The builders saw the end, and now it's waking up. Across the chamber, a new shadow stirred, not a watcher, but something vast, its presence a weight that crushed the air from her lungs. Mehmet cursed under his breath. Salim whimpered, and Layla drew a curved dagger, its blade glinting with symbols of its own. Evelyn's mind raced, piecing together fragments of lore. Göbekli Tepe's builders, hunter-gatherers turned architects, their rituals tied to the stars, their gods born of fear and awe. Had they sealed something here, something older than humanity itself? The shadow rose, its edges sharpening into a form that defied logic, limbs like pillars, eyes like dying suns. Evelyn clutched the lantern, its light a frail shield, and realized with chilling clarity that the mystery she chased wasn't just a relic of the past. It was alive, and it was angry. The shadow loomed larger, its form coalescing into something that defied the edges of Evelyn's sanity, a colossus of stone and smoke, its limbs grinding like tectonic plates, its eyes blazing with a light that wasn't light at all, but a void sucking at her soul. The air in the chamber thickened, pressing against her chest, and the hum that had haunted her since dusk sharpened into a wail, a chorus of ancient voices clawing at her mind. She stumbled back, the lantern slipping from her grip and shattering on the stone floor, plunging them into a dimness lit only by the tablet's fiery runes and the thing's unholy glow. "Stay together," Layla barked, her dagger slashing a crescent through the air. The blade's symbols flared, and a ripple of force shoved the shadow back, not much, but enough to buy them a heartbeat. Mehmet grabbed Evelyn's arm, hauling her upright, while Salim swung his crowbar wildly at nothing, his breaths coming in ragged sobs. "What the hell is that?" Mehmet growled, his knife trembling in his fist. "It's what they buried," Layla said, her voice steady despite the chaos. She stepped forward, planting herself between the group and the pit. The builders didn't just worship here, they trapped something they feared more than death. Evelyn's mind raced, fragments of her research snapping into place. Göbekli Tepe wasn't a temple in the traditional sense, no altars, no hearths, just those eerie T-shaped pillars and their cryptic carvings. Scholars had debated its purpose for decades. A sanctuary, a star observatory, a gathering place for nomadic tribes. But the shamans of prehistoric Anatolia, the ones who'd raised these stones before cities even existed, had left hints in the myths that followed tales of sky gods and earth spirits, of a war fought in the shadows of creation. She'd always dismissed the wilder theories as fringe nonsense, but now, staring into the abyss of those burning eyes, she wondered if the truth had been screaming at her all along. The colossus shifted, its massive hand sweeping down like a landslide. Layla dove aside, dragging Salim with her, while Evelyn and Mehmet hit the ground hard, dust choking their lungs. The blow cracked the dais, sending shards of black stone flying, and the tablet teetered precariously, its runes pulsing faster. Evelyn scrambled toward it, her hands shaking as she reached for the shard still fused to its surface. If it was a key, maybe it could stop this locket back, undo whatever she'd unleashed. "Don't," Layla shouted, lunging to intercept her. "You don't know what it'll do. I didn't know it'd do this either." Evelyn snapped, her fingers brushing the shard. The heat seared her skin, but she gripped it anyway, yanking it free. The tablet dimmed instantly, its light guttering like a dying flame, and the Colossus roared a sound that shook the chamber, loosening stones from the ceiling. For a moment, she thought she'd won, that the nightmare would collapse back into the pit. Then the runes on the shard reignited, brighter than before, and a new vibration rippled through the floor, not from the Colossus, but from the pillars ringing the chamber. Their carvings flared to life, animals and symbols twisting into motion, and the air crackled with static. Shadows peeled from the walls, not the gaunt watchers, but broader, heavier figures, their outlines humanoid yet wrong, like statues given breath. They moved with purpose, converging on the pit, and Evelyn realized with a chill that they weren't attacking the Colossus. They were joining it. "They're waking the others," Layla said, her voice tight with dread. She grabbed Evelyn's wrist, pulling her back as the first of the new shadows stepped into the pit, merging with the Colossus. Its form grew, sprouting jagged spines and a second pair of arms, each move reverberating with a power that made the ground quake. "Others?" Mehmet echoed, his eyes wide. "How many of these bastards are there?" "As many as they buried," Layla replied, her gaze flicking to the shard in Evelyn's hand. "That's not just a key, it's a call. The builders sealed them beneath the hills, one under each enclosure. This place isn't a temple, it's a prison." Evelyn's stomach dropped. Göbekli Tepe spanned acres, with dozens of enclosures excavated and more still hidden beneath the earth. If each held a monster like this, she'd just rung the dinner bell for an apocalypse older than human memory. "Why didn't you warn me?" she demanded, rounding on Layla. "I tried," Layla shot back. "I've been leaving signs notes, sabotaged equipment. You're too damn stubborn to notice." Before Evelyn could argue, Salim cried out, pointing at the tunnel. A figure emerged, not a shadow, but a man, cloaked in black, his face obscured by a hood, adorned with a silver crescent. He carried a staff topped with a carved bull's head, its eyes glinting like obsidian, and his presence silenced the chamber's chaos for a fleeting second. The Colossus paused, its gaze shifting to him, and the newly awakened shadows froze mid-step. "Who's that?" Mehmet whispered, his knife raised. "Trouble," Layla muttered, her grip tightening on her dagger. "That's a warden. They've been watching this place since the builders vanished." The man raised his staff, and a pulse of energy rippled outward, slamming the group back against the wall. Evelyn's head spun, the shards slipping from her grasp and clattering across the floor. The warden strode toward it, his movements fluid and deliberate, and knelt to retrieve it. When he spoke, his voice was deep, resonant, laced with an accent that echoed ancient Akkadian, a language Evelyn recognized from dusty Mesopotamian texts. "The spiral turns," he intoned, holding the shard aloft. "The debt of the ages comes due." "Wait!" Evelyn shouted, pushing herself up. "What debt? What are you doing?" He turned, his hood falling back to reveal a face both youthful and impossibly old, skin smooth, eyes ancient, a scar tracing his jaw like a riverbed. "You woke the Guardians," he said. "Their purpose is judgment. The builders defied the order of the stars, and now the earth pays the price." "Judgment," Salim stammered, clutching his crowbar like a lifeline. "For what?" The warden's gaze hardened. "For rising too soon. For daring to chain what should have been free." The Colossus rumbled, its form stabilizing as more shadows merged with it, and the pit began to widen, swallowing the dais whole. Evelyn's mind whirled 12,000 years ago. Humanity was still hunting and gathering. Yet the builders had constructed this marvel, a feat that defied everything she'd been taught. Had they stumbled onto something forbidden, a power they couldn't control? The myths of Anatolia spoke of sky gods warring with chthonic beasts, of mortals caught in the crossfire. Maybe this wasn't a prison, but a battlefield, and she'd just reopened the front lines. "We can stop it," she said, stepping toward the warden. "If the shard started this, it can end it. Tell me how." He studied her, his expression unreadable. "You assume it wants to be stopped. The Guardians serve no master but their own." "Then why are you here?" Layla interjected, her dagger still raised. "Wardens don't interfere unless there's something to gain." The warden smiled faintly, a cold, knowing curve of his lips, "To witness, and to claim what's mine when the dust settles." Before anyone could respond, the Colossus lunged, its massive fist slamming into the floor where the warden had stood. He vanished in a blur, reappearing near the pit, the shard still in his grasp. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, cracking the pillars and hurling Evelyn into Mehmet. She hit the ground hard, her vision swimming, and saw Layla dart forward, hurling another vial at the Colossus. The liquid splashed across its chest, sizzling like acid, and it recoiled with a bellow that shook the walls. "Move!" Layla yelled, dragging Salim toward the tunnel. "We can't fight this here." Evelyn staggered to her feet, Mehmet at her side, and risked a glance back. The warden stood motionless, watching as the pit expanded, the Colossus growing ever larger. Beyond it, the horizon shimmered not stone, but sky, a jagged tear opening above the chamber. Stars blazed through, unfamiliar and cold, and she felt a pull in her gut, a certainty that whatever came next would rewrite everything she knew. The tunnel loomed ahead, but the ground trembled beneath her, and the wail of the ancient voices grew louder, chanting words she couldn't understand yet somehow, deep in her bones, she did. The tunnel walls shuddered as Evelyn sprinted after Layla, Mehmet, and Selim, the ground bucking beneath their feet like a living thing. Dust rained from the ceiling, stinging her eyes, and the air grew hotter, thick, with a sulphurous tang that clawed at her throat. Behind them, the Colossus's roar mingled with the grinding of stone, and the unearthly chant, a rhythmic pulse of syllables that burrowed into her skull, tugging at memories she didn't own. She stumbled, catching herself against a rune-carved wall, and for a fleeting second, the symbols flared under her palm, showing her a vision, a circle of robed figures beneath a star-streaked sky, their hands raised to a writhing darkness, their voices weaving a cage of sound. Then it was gone, leaving her gasping. "Keep moving!" Mehmet shouted, his broad hand clamping onto her shoulder and shoving her forward. His face was streaked with dirt, his beard matted with sweat, but his eyes burned with a fierce determination that anchored her. Ahead, Layla led the way, her cloak billowing as she navigated the twisting passage, Salim staggering behind her, his crowbar dragging sparks along the stone. The tunnel sloped upward now, its walls narrowing until they had to duck beneath jagged overhangs. The chanting grew fainter, but the tremors intensified, each jolt threatening to collapse the passage around them. Evelyn's mind churned, piecing together the warden's words: judgment, the debt of the ages, the order of the stars. Göbekli Tepe's pillars had always hinted at an astronomical obsession, their orientations aligning with Sirius and Orion in a night sky 12 years past. Had the builders seen something up there, something they'd tried to bind beneath the earth? The Colossus Guardians, he'd called them, felt older than gods, older than time, a force the shamans had wrestled into submission with blood and stone. Layla skidded to a halt, her dagger raised, and Evelyn nearly crashed into her. The tunnel opened into a shallow cavern, its ceiling studded with stalactites that gleamed like wet teeth. Moonlight filtered through a ragged hole above, casting silver pools across the floor. And in the center stood a cluster of smaller pillars, miniatures of the T-shaped giants outside. their surfaces crawling with runes. But it wasn't the stones that stopped them. It was the figures waiting there. 3 silhouettes, cloaked like the warden, their staffs glowing with a sickly amber light. Their hoods hid their faces, but the air around them crackled with menace. More wardens, Layla hissed, her stance shifting into a fighter's crouch. They've been tracking the shard too. Friends of yours? Mehmet asked, his knife glinting as he stepped beside her. Not even close, she replied, her eyes narrowing. They're scavengers. They wait for the chaos, then pick the bones clean. The lead warden stepped forward, his staff tapping the ground with a sound like breaking glass. The key bearer, he said, his voice a dry rasp that echoed off the walls. You've done well to bring it this far. Surrender it, and you may yet live. Evelyn's hand tightened around the shard. She'd snatched it back during the scramble, its heat now a steady pulse against her skin. You mean this? Seems like everyone wants it, but no one's explaining why. The warden tilted his head, a gesture eerily reminiscent of the Watchers. It is the thread that binds the spiral. Without it, the Guardians sleep. With it, they wake, and the reckoning begins. Reckoning for what? She pressed, buying time as her eyes darted for an escape. The hole in the ceiling was too high, the tunnel behind them a death trap, with the Colossus on their heels. The builders are gone. Whatever they did, it's not our fight. The warden laughed, a sound like wind through dead branches. Their blood runs in you still. The stars do not forget. Before she could retort, the ground heaved again, and a deafening crack split the cavern. The Colossus's arm, now a grotesque fusion of stone and shadow, burst through the tunnel mouth, its claws raking the walls. The wardens spun, their staffs flaring, and unleashed a barrage of amber light that slammed into the beast. It recoiled, but only for a moment, its bulk forcing its way in, splintering the passage behind it. The smaller pillars trembled, their runes igniting, and Evelyn felt the shard pulse in sync, a rhythm that matched the chant still echoing in her head. Up! Layla shouted, pointing at a ledge near the ceiling. She sheathed her dagger and leapt, catching the edge with a grunt, then hauled herself up. Mehmet boosted Selim next, the kid's lanky frame scrambling awkwardly, then turned to Evelyn. Go! He barked, cupping his hands. She stepped into them, and he launched her upward, her fingers gripping the ledge as Layla pulled her over. Mehmet followed, his strength belying his years, and they crouched there, watching the chaos below. The wardens fought with ruthless precision, their staffs weaving patterns of light that seared the Colossus's flesh, or whatever passed for it. But the beast was relentless, its form swelling as more shadows poured from the pit, merging with its mass. The smaller pillars glowed brighter, and Evelyn realized with a jolt that they weren't just decorations, they were anchors, nodes in a network that stretched across the site. The builders hadn't just buried one guardian, they'd woven a web to hold them all, and she'd snapped the first thread. We can't stay here, Selim whispered, his voice shaking. It's gonna bring the whole place down. He's right, Mehmet said, wiping sweat from his brow. But where the hell do we go? Layla's eyes flicked to the shard in Evelyn's hand, then to the moonlight above. Out. We need to reach the surface, figure out what this thing does before they get it. And the wardens? Evelyn asked, nodding at the battle below. They'll keep it busy, Layla said grimly. But they're not on our side. If they win, they'll come for us next. A stalactite crashed down, narrowly missing the lead warden, and the Colossus roared, its voice shaking loose more debris. Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we climb. They scaled the cavern wall, using cracks and jutting stones as handholds, the moonlight their only guide. The air grew colder as they neared the hole, and Evelyn's arms burned. But she pushed on, the shard tucked into her jacket. Below, the warden's light dimmed, their chants faltering as the Colossus gained ground. She didn't look back, couldn't afford to until her hands gripped the edge of the opening, and Mehmet shoved her through. They emerged onto a windswept hill, the night sky sprawling above them, stars glittering with a clarity that stole her breath. Göbekli stretched out below its enclosures, dark and silent, the dig site abandoned under the storm clouds that had rolled in earlier. But the silence was a lie. The ground trembled faintly, and in the distance, near enclosure D, a faint glow pulsed, mirrored by others across the landscape. More guardians, waking one by one. Layla knelt, catching her breath, and pulled a small leather pouch from her cloak. She spilled its contents onto the ground, bits of bone, a polished stone, a feather, and muttered words in a tongue Evelyn didn't recognize, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. The air shimmered, and a faint outline appeared, a map of the site, glowing like a hologram, with lines connecting the enclosures in a spiral that matched the shard's runes. "What is that?" Salim asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A key of my own," Layla said, her eyes scanning the map. The builders left markers, ways to track the seals. "This one's broken, but the others are still holding. For now." Evelyn pulled the shard from her jacket, its light dimmer but still alive. "So this controls them? Can we use it to shut them down?" "Maybe," Layla said, her tone uncertain. "But it's not that simple. The Wardens wanted to finish what the builders started, let the Guardians loose. We'd need to find the central seal, the heart of the spiral. And where's that?" Mehmet asked, his gaze flicking to the glowing enclosures. Layla pointed north, toward a ridge the team hadn't excavated yet, a mound untouched by modern hands, its outline sharp against the starry sky. "There, but we won't be alone." As if on cue, a shadow flickered at the edge of the hill. The first Warden, his cloak torn, his staff still glowing. He stepped forward, the shard's twin in his hand, and behind him, the Colossus's roar shook the night. Closer now, its bulk rising from the cavern, like a mountain birthed from the earth. Evelyn's heart pounded as she met his gaze, the weight of the shard in her palm, a tether to a mystery she could no longer escape. The stars above shifted, their patterns twisting into something ancient and wrong, and she knew the reckoning wasn't just coming, it was already here. The wind tore across the hilltop, whipping Evelyn's hair into her face as she stared down the Warden, his silhouette stark against the pulsing glow of the Colossus rising behind him. The night sky churned, stars bending into a spiral that mirrored the shard in her hand, a constellation no modern astronomer would recognize, yet it tugged at her like a half-remembered dream. The ground beneath her boots vibrated, a low growl rising from the earth, and the distant enclosures flared brighter, their light bleeding into the darkness like wounds in the landscape. Whatever the builders had locked away, it was clawing free, and she was caught in the crosshairs. "Give it to me," the Warden said, his voice cutting through the gale like a blade. He extended his scarred hand, the twin shard in his grip, pulsing in time with hers. "You cannot stop what's begun." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her shard, its warmth a lifeline against the cold dread sinking into her bones. "You keep saying that, but I'm not handing over anything until I know what it does." The Warden's lips curled into that faint, chilling smile. "It calls the Guardians home. The builders stole their dominion, bound them beneath these hills. Now the debt is due, and the stars demand balance." "Balance," Mehmet spat, stepping forward with his knife raised. "That thing down there doesn't look like it's balancing anything. It's tearing the place apart." The Warden's gaze flicked to him, dismissive. Mortals always fear what they cannot comprehend. "The Guardians are not destruction, they are judgment. The builders reached beyond their place, and you inherit their sin." Before Evelyn could argue, Layla surged forward, her dagger slashing at the Warden's outstretched arm. He sidestepped with inhuman grace, his staff swinging up to meet her blade. Sparks flew as metal clashed with amber light, and the air crackled with a force that shoved Evelyn back. Salim yelped, ducking behind Mehmet, who lunged to join the fray, but the Warden spun, slamming his staff into the ground. A shockwave erupted, hurling them all off their feet. Evelyn hit the dirt hard, her breath knocked out, the shard skittering from her grasp. "No!" she gasped, scrambling toward it, but the warden was faster. He snatched it up, holding both shards aloft, and their combined light flared blindingly white. The colossus bellowed, its massive form breaching the cavern fully now, its head a grotesque amalgam of stone and shadow, crowned with jagged spines. The earth split beneath it, fissures racing toward the hill, and the smaller enclosures erupted in gouts of dust and light more. Guardians stirring, their roars a chorus that drowned the wind. "We've got to move!" Layla shouted, hauling Evelyn up as Mehmet grabbed Salim. She pointed toward the northern ridge, its mound now glowing faintly against the twisted sky. "The central seal, it's our only shot." They ran, the ground crumbling under their feet, the warden's laughter chasing them like a ghost. Evelyn's lungs burned, her mind racing. Judgment, sin, the stars. The builders had been hunter-gatherers, yet they'd raised Göbekli Tepe with a precision that baffled science. Their pillars tracking celestial paths lost to time. Anatolian myths whispered of a war between sky and earth, of shamans who'd bargained with powers beyond their ken. Had they trapped these guardians to protect humanity, or to claim their might for themselves? The ridge loomed closer, its slopes steep and treacherous, dotted with ancient stones that jutted like broken teeth. Layla led them to a crevice half hidden by scrub, its edges worn smooth as if carved by hands long gone. She squeezed through, beckoning them after, and they emerged into a hollow and natural amphitheater ringed by more T-shaped pillars, these larger than any Evelyn had seen, their carvings deeper, more intricate. At the center stood a monolith, unlike the others, a towering slab of black basalt, its surface etched with a spiral of runes that glowed a deep, arterial red. The air here was still, heavy, as if the storm dared not touch it. "The heart of the spiral," Layla said, her voice hushed. She knelt, tracing the glowing map again, its lines converging on this spot. "This is where they sealed the first guardian, the strongest one." Evelyn approached the monolith, her breath fogging in the chill. The runes pulsed faster as she neared, and she felt a pull, not just from the shard, now in the warden's hands, but from something within her, a resonance that made her skin crawl. If this is the heart, can we stop them here? Lock them back? Layla hesitated, her eyes dark with doubt. Maybe. But it's not just stone and symbols. The builders used blood sacrifices to bind them. We need something equal to undo it. "Blood?" Salim squeaked, clutching his crowbar tighter. "You mean like ours?" "Not yet," Mehmet growled, scanning the crevice they'd entered. "But we've got company." Shadows moved at the entrance, not the warden, but the watchers, their gaunt forms slinking into the hollow, their hollow eyes fixed on the monolith, and their whispers filled the air, a sibilant chant that matched the one in Evelyn's head. They ignored the group, gliding toward the basalt slab, their claws brushing its surface. The runes flared brighter, and a crack split the monolith's base, leaking a thick, blackish ore that pooled on the ground. "They're waking it," Layla said, her voice tight. She pulled another vial from her pouch, this one filled with a silvery liquid, and hurled it at the watchers. It shattered, splashing across them, and they shrieked, their forms dissolving into smoke. But more appeared, spilling from the crevice like ants from a nest. "We can't fight them all," Mehmet roared, slashing at one with his knife. The blade sank into its chest, and it dissipated, but two more took its place. Evelyn's gaze darted to the monolith, the ichor now spreading, its surface rippling like a living thing. She remembered the warden's words. The stars demand balance. The builders had tracked the heavens, their pillars a map of cosmic order. Maybe this wasn't about blood, but alignment, a ritual tied to the sky above. She glanced up, the spiral of stars tightening, and spotted a faint red glow near its center, a star she hadn't noticed before, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Salim, your phone," she shouted, turning to him. "The star app, can you identify that?" He fumbled with his cracked phone, hands shaking as he swiped through screens. It's not in the database, but it's brightening magnitudes off the charts. It's not a star, Layla said, her eyes widening. It's a marker. The builders used it to time the seals. The ground shuddered harder, the monolith splitting further, and a low, guttural sound rose from beneath a voice, vast and ancient, speaking words that twisted her gut. The watchers chanted louder, their numbers swelling, and the Colossus's roar echoed from the south, closing in. Evelyn's heart pounded as she pieced it together. The shard, the monolith, the sky. The builders hadn't just bound the guardians, they'd tied them to a celestial clock, and she'd started it ticking again. "We need to realign it," she said, stepping toward the monolith despite Mehmet's protest. "If the star's the key, we can use it to reset the seal." "How?" Layla demanded, dodging a watcher's claw. "We don't have the shards." Evelyn didn't answer, her hands pressing against the monolith's runes. They burned, searing her palms, but she held on, feeling the rhythm of the chant shift, syncing with the star's pulse. The echo recoiled, and the crack slowed, but the watchers turned on her, their whispers sharpening into screams. Mehmet and Layla fought them off, Selim swinging his crowbar with wild desperation, but they were losing ground. Then the warden appeared, stepping from the shadows of the crevice, both shards blazing in his hands. The Colossus loomed behind him, its eyes locked on the monolith, and the sky above split wider, revealing a void speckled with alien light. He raised the shards, and the monolith's runes answered, flaring so bright Evelyn's vision blurred. "You cannot stop it," he said, his voice calm amid the storm. "But you can choose whose side you're on when it ends." The ground buckled, the monolith trembling as the first guardian's voice grew louder, its words no longer alien but clear. Rarais. Evelyn's hands shook, the runes branding her skin, and she felt the weight of 12 years crashing down, builders, guardians, stars, and blood, all spiraling toward a reckoning she couldn't yet see. The monolith's runes seared into Evelyn's palms, a fire that didn't just burn but spoke, a language of anguish and defiance echoing from a time when humanity first dared to look up and dream. The warden stood before her, the twin shards blazing like captured suns, his scarred face unreadable as the Colossus loomed at his back, its shadow swallowing the hollow. The watcher's screams clawed at her ears, and the sky's spiral tightened, that alien red star pulsing like a wound in the heavens. She felt the first guardian stirring beneath her feet, its voice, our eyes, a command that rattled her bones, promising not just destruction, but a rewriting of everything she'd ever known. "Evelyn! Get back!" Mehmet roared, his knife slashing through a watcher's smoky form as he shielded Selim, who swung his crowbar with desperate fury. Layla fought beside them, her dagger a blur, her vials spent, her face streaked with sweat and resolve. They were losing outnumbered, outmatched, but they didn't falter. Their ragged breaths, a testament to something the warden couldn't grasp. They weren't just fighting for survival, but for each other. The warden stepped closer, the shard's light casting jagged shadows across the monolith. "You cling to a world already judged," he said, his voice steady, almost pitying. "The builders thought they could master the stars. They failed. You will too." Evelyn's knees buckled under the monolith's weight, but she held on, her mind racing through fragments of lore 12,000 years ago. The builders had raised these stones, not as conquerors, but as penitents, their carvings a plea to the cosmos. Anatolian myths spoke of a pact. Humanity offered blood and sweat to appease the earth and sky, a balance struck in the shadow of chaos. The guardians weren't gods or demons. She realized they were enforcers, born of the universe's raw edges, tasked with keeping that balance. The builders hadn't stolen their power, they'd borrowed it, and now the debt was overdue. "I'm not them," she rasped, meeting the warden's gaze. "We're not them. Whatever they did, we can fix it." He tilted his head, intrigued. Fix it? You woke them. The spiral turns because of you. No, Layla snapped, kicking a watcher aside as she staggered to Evelyn's side. It turns because of you. The wardens let it fester watching, waiting instead of acting. You're as guilty as the builders. The warden's smile faded, and for a moment, doubt flickered in his ancient eyes. The colossus roared, its claws raking the air, and the monolith cracked wider, ichor surging from its base. The watchers swarmed, their chants peaking, and the red star flared, bathing the hollow in crimson light. Evelyn felt the first guardian's presence solidify a vast, incomprehensible mind brushing hers, judging not just her, but every soul that had walked since the builder's time. It wasn't anger she sensed, but sorrow, a grief older than stone. "Salim, the star!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "When does it peak?" He fumbled with his phone, dodging a watcher's lunge with Mehmet's help. "Now, right now. It's at zenith." The zenith, the builder's marker. Evelyn pressed harder against the monolith, her blood smearing the runes where her skin had blistered. The chant in her head shifted, no longer a command but a question. Why? She saw them again, those robed figures beneath the stars, their hands stained red, their voices weaving a seal not out of greed, but fear. They'd glimpsed something in the sky, a truth too vast to hold, and they'd bound the guardians to shield their fragile world. Not conquest, but survival. "We're not fighting you," she whispered, not to the warden, but to the presence beneath. "We're finishing what they started." The runes pulsed, her blood sinking into them, and the monolith trembled not with rage, but recognition. The watchers faltered, their forms wavering, and the colossus paused, its burning eyes fixed on her. Layla grabbed her shoulder, steadying her, and Mehmet and Salim closed ranks, their weapons raised but their faces alight with something new, hope. The warden thrust the shards forward, their light merging into a beam that struck the monolith. "You cannot rewrite fate," he cried, but his voice cracked, betraying a fear he hadn't shown before. The beam hit, and the runes flared, not white but gold, a warm living glow that spread across the hollow. The ichor receded, the crack sealed, and the first guardian's voice softened, its mild eyes becoming a sigh. "Arrest." The ground stilled, the watchers dissolved into ash, and the colossus staggered, its form unraveling like smoke in the wind. The sky's spiral unwound, the red star dimming, and the distant enclosures faded to silence. The warden dropped the shards, his staff clattering to the ground, and for the first time, he looked small human, stripped of his timeless weight. "It's over," Evelyn said, slumping against the monolith, her hands raw but steady. "We paid the debt." The warden stared at her, then at the shards, now dark and cold. "Not over," he murmured, delayed. "The stars still watch." He turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving the hollow eerily quiet. Layla sank to her knees, her breath ragged. "You did it." "I didn't think." "We did it," Evelyn corrected, glancing at Mehmet and Salim, who grinned despite their exhaustion. "But what was it?" "Their conscience," Layla said softly, her eyes on the monolith. "The builders locked them away, but they left a way back a test. You passed it." Evelyn nodded, the weight of it settling in not victory, but responsibility. The guardians slept again, their judgment staved off, but the stars remained, eternal and patient. Dawn crept over Göbekli Tepe, painting the hills in hues of amber and rose, the storm clouds parting to reveal a sky scrubbed clean of its alien scars. Evelyn sat atop the northern ridge, the monolith silent behind her, its runes dulled but warm to the touch. Mehmet leaned against a pillar, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes, while Salim sprawled in the grass, his phone abandoned, his face peaceful for the first time since the nightmare began. Layla stood apart, her cloak fluttering in the breeze, her gaze lost in the horizon. They'd spent the night piecing it together, Layla's map, the builder's ritual, the shard's purpose. The Guardians weren't enemies, but sentinels, born of the cosmos to guard its order. The Builders, in their awe and terror, had harnessed them to protect a fledgling humanity, offering their lives to seal the pact. The Wardens had twisted that legacy, hoarding the secret for power, but Evelyn's blood, her choice, had reset the balance, proving humanity could rise beyond its past. "It's not the end, is it?" Salim asked, sitting up, his voice soft but steady. Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, it's a beginning. They're still down there, sleeping, waiting. But we showed them we're worth it." Mehmet grunted, sheathing his knife. "Worth what?" "Time," Layla said, turning to them. "To grow, to learn. The Builders bought us a chance. We just earned another." She handed Evelyn a small stone from her pouch, smooth, etched with a single rune, a circle bisected by a line. "A marker," she explained, "to remind us. I'm staying, someone has to watch. But you." Evelyn took it. "It's weight, a promise. I'll keep digging. Not to wake them, but to understand them. We owe them that much." They stood together as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the ancient stones. Göbekli Tepe stretched below, its secrets intact, but no longer hostile, a testament to humanity's first steps, flawed yet brave. The Guardians slept, their judgment softened by a fragile, stubborn hope, and the stars above shone not as judges, but witnesses to a story still unfolding. Evelyn clutched the stone, her burns a badge of survival, and felt the echo of the Builders' chant, not a curse, but a blessing, live. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the hills answered back. Story 3. The Nazca Line Celestial Code. The sun hung low over the barren expanse of southern Peru, a relentless orb of fire casting long shadows across the cracked ochre earth. Dr. Elena Voss adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, wiping sweat from her brow as the Cessna 172 rattled beneath her. At 36, she was no stranger to the skies. Years as an archaeologist had taught her that some mysteries only revealed themselves from above. But today, her heart thrummed with something more than the usual thrill of discovery. The Nazca Line stretched out below, a sprawling tapestry of geoglyphs etched into the desert floor by a people lost to time. Spirals, monkeys, hummingbirds, giant figures carved over 2,000 years ago, their purpose a riddle that had baffled scholars for centuries. Elena wasn't here for the tourist traps or the textbook theories. She was chasing a whisper, a fragment of a story she'd found in a dusty Lima archive, a Nazca priest's account of the stars that walk the earth. The plane dipped, and her pilot, Javier, a wiry Peruvian with a perpetual smirk, glanced back. "You sure about this, Doc? That spot you marked, it's off the grid. No roads, no water, just sand and ghosts. Ghosts don't scare me," Elena lied, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. "Just get me low enough to see." Javier shrugged and banked the Cessna, the engine's growl vibrating through her bones. The lines sharpened below perfectly straight trenches, some stretching miles, others coiling into shapes no human eye could fully grasp from the ground. Then she saw it, a patch of desert near the edge of the plateau where the lines converged in a way she'd never noticed before. Not a figure, not an animal, but a grid, a starburst of intersecting paths, like a map of the heavens fallen to earth. Her breath caught. It matched the sketch in the priest's journal, a faded drawing labeled El Código Estelar, the celestial code. "Land there," she said, pointing. Javier raised an eyebrow but obeyed, guiding the plane toward a flat stretch of dirt a half-mile away. The wheels kissed the ground with a jolt, and soon Elena was boots down in the desert, her pack slung over one shoulder, a handheld GPS blinking in the fading light. The air smelled of dust and ancient secrets, thick with the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. She trekked toward the starburst, her shadow stretching like a specter across the sand. Up close, the lines were shallow trenches, their edges hardened by centuries of wind and sun. She knelt, tracing a finger along one groove. The Nazca had no written language, or so the textbooks claimed, but this grid felt deliberate, mathematical. She pulled out her notebook, flipping to the priest's words. When the stars align, the walkers return, and the earth will sing their song. Cryptic, sure, but Elena had spent her career decoding the cryptic. She'd traced the Nazca lines as alignments to constellations Orion, the Pleiades, but this grid pointed somewhere else, somewhere uncharted. A faint hum broke her focus. At first, she thought it was the wind, a low moan rolling across the plateau, but it grew sharper, rhythmic, like a pulse beneath the ground. She pressed her ear to the sand, and there it was, a vibration, steady and alive. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't natural. She grabbed her trowel and started digging where the lines intersected, the hum growing louder with every scrape. 6 inches down, her blade struck something solid. She brushed away the dirt, revealing a slab of black stone, smooth as obsidian, etched with symbols she'd never seen, spirals within spirals, dots connected by jagged lines, a star map, a code. Whatever it wasn't Nazca at least. Not the Nazca she knew. Find something shiny, Voss? The voice was cold, clipped, and all too familiar. Elena spun, her hand instinctively gripping the trowel like a weapon. Standing 20 yards away was Marcus Drace, his lean frame silhouetted against the sunset. The rival archaeologist's tailored jacket and polished boots looked absurdly out of place in the desert, but his steel gray eyes glinted with menace. Behind him stood 2 hired thugs, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. "Marcus," she spat, rising to her feet. "What's the play this time? Steal my work or just bury me with it?" He smirked, stepping closer, his polished British accent dripping with disdain. "You've always been so dramatic, Elena. I'm not here for your notes. I'm here for that." He nodded at the stone slab, its surface catching the last rays of light. "The celestial code. My employers have been waiting a long time for it." Employers? Elena's mind raced. Marcus had always been a glory hound, chasing fame over truth, but this was different. "Who's pulling your strings?" "You'll see soon enough," he said, motioning to his men. "Take it." And her. The thugs advanced, but before they could close the gap, the ground shuddered. A deep, resonant boom echoed across the desert, and the hum beneath Elena's feet erupted into a deafening roar. She stumbled, clutching the slab as cracks spiderwebbed through the sand. Marcus froze, his smug grin faltering. Then the Nazca lines themselves began to glow, a faint blue light pulsing along their lengths, illuminating the starburst in a web of eerie radiance. "What the hell?" one of the thugs muttered, his rifle dipping, but his words were cut off as the air shimmered and shapes emerged from the light. Tall, ethereal figures, their forms flickering like mirages, humanoid but not human, their skin a sheen of starlit silver. The walkers. Elena's breath hitched as the priest's warning flashed through her mind. The stars were aligning right now, and something ancient was waking up. Marcus recovered first, barking orders. "Shoot them! Get the slab!" But the figures didn't flinch as bullets tore through the air, passing harmlessly through their glowing forms. One turned its head toward Elena, its eyes twin voids of endless night. A voice not heard but felt rumbled in her skull. "You have called us." The song begins. Panic clawed at her chest, but she held the slab tighter, its symbols now pulsing in sync with the lines. She didn't know what it meant, not yet, but she knew one thing. Marcus couldn't have it. She bolted, sprinting toward a shallow ravine as the desert erupted into chaos behind her. The walkers advanced, their presence bending the air, while Marcus shouted curses and his men fired uselessly into the light. She slid into the ravine, her breath ragged, and risked a glance at the slab. The symbols shifted, rearranging into a pattern that tugged at her memory constellations. Yes, but not from Earth's sky. Her years studying archaeoastronomy screamed at her. This was a map to somewhere else, a warning, a summons. She needed time, tools, a team, but all she had was the desert and the hum. Now a chorus vibrating through her bones. Footsteps crunched above. She peeked over the edge and saw a new figure, not Marcus, not his goons, but an old man in a tattered poncho. His weathered face etched with lines as deep as the geoglyphs. His eyes locked on hers, sharp and knowing. "You've opened it, Nina," he rasped, his voice thick with a Quechua accent. "The Chicana calls them back." "Chicana?" Elena whispered, clutching the slab. "The Incan cross." A bridge between worlds. She'd seen it in Nazca pottery, but this was older, stranger. "Who are you?" "Call me Tupa," he said, offering a gnarled hand. "I guard what they left behind. Come, they'll kill you for that, or worse." She hesitated, then took his hand, letting him pull her from the ravine. The desert was a battlefield now. Marcus and his men retreating as the walkers glided silently. After them, their light casting shadows that twisted like living things. Tupa led her toward a cluster of rocks, his pace surprisingly swift. "The Nazca knew," he said, breathless. "The lines aren't pictures, they're a lock, and you just turned the key." They ducked behind a boulder as a scream pierced the night. One of Marcus's men, swallowed by the light. Elena's mind spun. The Nazca had no wheels, no iron, yet they'd carved this vast network with precision modern engineers envied. Scholars argued it was for rituals, water, astronomy, but a lock? For what? She studied the slab again, its symbols glowing brighter. The hum was a song now, dissonant and haunting, pulling at something deep inside her. Tupa pointed to a faint trail winding into the hills. "There's a place they can't follow, a sanctuary older than the lines. We go now, or we die." She nodded, adrenaline surging. Marcus was still out there, and whatever employers he served wouldn't stop. The walkers, whatever they were, weren't done either. The mystery was unraveling, thread by thread, and Elena was caught in its web. As they ran, the desert glowed behind them, the celestial code singing its ancient song into the night. Hours later, they reached a cave hidden in the foothills, its entrance marked by a crude Chicana scratched into the stone. Inside, the air was cool and damp, the walls alive with faded carvings, stars, spirals, figures like the walkers. Tupa lit a small fire, his hands trembling. "My people called them the Hanan Pachak Wasio, the keepers of the upper world," he said. "They came before the Nazca, before the sun was young, left the lines to call them back." Elena traced a carving, her fingers brushing a figure holding a slab like hers. Why now? What's the alignment? Tupa's eyes darkened. The stars shift every 1,000 years. Tonight, they match the code. You found it, so they came. But they don't serve us, they judge. A chill ran through her. Judgment. The priest's journal hadn't mentioned that. She set the slab on the ground, its light dimming but still alive. What happens next? Before Tupa could answer, a shadow fell across the cave mouth. Marcus stood there, blood streaked across his face, his pistol aimed at Elena's chest. One thug flanked him, the other presumably lost to the walkers. "You're predictable, Voss," he sneered. "Running to some hole with your pet shaman. Give me the slab, or I paint this cave with your brains." Tupa lunged, but the thug clubbed him down with a rifle butt. Elena's heart pounded as she stepped between them, the slab behind her. "You don't know what it does, Marcus. You'll doom us all." "I don't care what it does," he snapped. "The Order of the Saffron Veil does. They've waited centuries for this, and I'm their key. Last chance." The hum surged again, shaking the cave. Dust rained from the ceiling as the carvings flared to life, their light bathing Marcus in blue. His eyes widened, but he didn't back down. Elena's mind raced to surrender the slab, and Marcus's shadowy order would wield whatever power it held. Fight, and she'd die here. Then she saw it, a carving above Marcus's head. A walker pointing to a spiral. A way out? She dove for the slab, rolling as Marcus fired, the bullet ricocheting off stone. The hum became a scream, and the cave floor cracked, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Tuba groaned, clutching his head, but waved her on. Go! It's the path! Elena hesitated, then grabbed the slab and plunged down the stairs, Marcus's curses echoing behind her. The steps were slick, ancient, spiraling deeper than she could fathom. The light from the slab guided her, its symbols shifting faster now, like a countdown. She stumbled into a chamber, vast and domed, its ceiling a mirror of the Nazca lines in glowing blue. In the center stood a pedestal, empty, waiting. She approached, the slab vibrating in her hands. The air thickened, and the walkers appeared not as mirages now, but solid, their silver forms towering over her. The voice in her head returned, colder, final, place it, and be judged. Footsteps pounded down the stairs. Marcus was coming, and the walkers were watching. Elena's fingers hovered over the pedestal. The celestial code was hers to unlock or destroy, but what did it mean? Salvation? Doom? The song swelled, the chamber trembled, and the choice loomed like a shadow across the desert of time. Elena's hands trembled as she gripped the slab, its surface warm and pulsing like a living thing. The chamber around her thrummed with energy, the glowing Nazca lines on the ceiling casting jagged shadows across the walkers' silver forms. Their void-like eyes bore into her, unblinking, their presence a weight that pressed against her chest. The voice echoed in her skull again, place it and be judged. Each word a shard of ice sliding down her spine. Judged for what? By whom? The slab's symbols danced faster now, spiraling into patterns that teased the edges of her understanding constellations. Yes, but alien, vast, older than the stars she knew. The sound of boots slapping stone snapped her focus back. Marcus burst into the chamber, his pistol raised, his face a mask of fury and desperation. Sweat streaked the blood on his cheek, and his tailored jacket hung in tatters. Behind him, his lone surviving thug, a hulking brute with a shaved head and a scar, splitting his lip, clutched a rifle, his eyes darting nervously to the walkers. They didn't move, didn't react, just stood like sentinels carved from moonlight. Step away from that pedestal, Voss, Marcus snarled, his voice tight with barely contained panic. You've got no idea what you're meddling with. And you do? Elena shot back, edging closer to the pedestal, the slab a shield between them. You're a puppet, Marcus. The Order of the Saffron Veil, who are they? What do they want with this? His lips curled into a sneer, but his gaze flickered to the walkers, betraying a crack in his bravado. They're the ones who see the bigger picture. This, he gestured at the slab, the chamber, the glowing lines, this is power. The kind that reshapes the world. And I'm not letting some bleeding heart academic botch it. The hum surged, a wave of sound that rattled the chamber's walls. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, and the pedestal pulsed in sync with the slab, its surface etched with the same spiraling symbols. Elena's mind raced, piecing together fragments of Nazca lore she'd studied, tales of sky gods, of Supe, the underworld trickster, of the Hanan Pacha, the upper world, where celestial beings reigned. The Chicana. Tupa had called it a bridge. But a bridge to what? The walkers didn't look like gods. They looked like judges or executioners. A groan from the stairs drew her eye. Tupa staggered into the chamber, one hand pressed to his bleeding temple, the other clutching a small, carved object, a wooden chicana, its edges worn smooth by time. Don't listen to him, Nina, he rasped, his voice raw but steady. The slab's not theirs to take. It's a test. Marcus swung his pistol toward Tupa. Shut it, old man, or I finish what my friend started. The thug smirked, hefting his rifle, but Tupa didn't flinch. He met Elena's gaze, his dark eyes fierce with urgency. A test? She echoed, her voice barely audible over the hum. For who? For us, Tuba said, limping closer. The Nazca built the lines to call them the Keepers. Not to worship, but to prove we're worthy. Place it wrong, and the song ends us all. The walkers shifted, a ripple of movement so subtle Elena almost missed it. Their heads tilted, as if listening, her gut twisted. Worthy of what? Survival? Ascension? She'd spent her life digging for answers, not playing cosmic games. But the slab burned hotter in her hands, its light flaring, and she knew she was out of time. Marcus lunged, faster than she'd expected, his free hand clawing for the slab. She twisted away, but his fingers grazed it, and the chamber erupted. A shockwave of blue light blasted from the pedestal, hurling Marcus back. He hit the wall with a sickening crunch, his pistol skittering across the floor. The thug fired wildly, bullets pinging off stone, but the walkers raised their hands, and the air thickened, swallowing the sound. The gun glowed red hot, and the thug screamed, dropping it as his palms blistered. Elena staggered, clutching the slab to her chest. The symbols locked into place, a single, unbroken spiral, mirrored by the pedestal. The voice returned, louder, insistent. Place it. Now. Her knees buckled under the weight of it, not just the slab, but the choice. Tupa's words clawed at her, a test. But what was the right answer? Place it and risk annihilation. Hold back and let Marcus's order claim it? Tupa grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. The carvings, look. He pointed to the walls, where the glowing figures now moved, their forms shifting in a silent dance. One held a slab aloft, another pointed to the sky, a third knelt before a spiral. It's a story, he whispered. They came before, judged the Nazca. Some passed, some didn't. The lines are their mark. Elena's breath hitched as history snapped into focus. The Nazca masters of irrigation, weavers of intricate textiles, had vanished around 700 AD. Drought, scholars said, or conquest. But what if it wasn't nature or war? What if they'd faced this test and failed? She scanned the carvings again, her archaeologist's mind racing. The spiral wasn't just a symbol, it was a map, a cycle. The Nazca had aligned their lines with the stars, not for beauty, but for survival. Marcus groaned, pulling himself up, his eyes blazing with hate. You're stalling, Voss. Give it to me, or I swear. He lunged again, but Tupa swung his chicana, cracking it against Marcus's skull. The rival archaeologist crumpled, blood pooling beneath him, though his chest still rose and fell. Alive, but out. The thug hesitated, then bolted up the stairs, abandoning his boss. Elena didn't blame him. The walkers were closing in now, their silver forms tightening the circle around her and Tupa. The hum was a roar, the song a cacophony of notes that vibrated through her teeth. She stumbled to the pedestal, the slab's heat searing her palms. If it's a test, she muttered. What's the question? Tupa knelt beside her, his voice a low chant in Quechua, words she couldn't translate but felt in her bones. It's trust, he said finally. They left it for us to choose open the bridge or close it forever. The chamber quaked, cracks splitting the floor. Above, the ceiling's lines flared brighter, mirroring the desert sky she'd seen from the plane. Orion's belt, the Pleiades, and something else, a faint cluster she didn't recognize, pulsing like a heartbeat. The alignment, it was happening now, just as the priest's journal had hinted. Elena's hands hovered over the pedestal, every instinct screaming at her to stop, to think, to analyze. But there was no time. She slammed the slab into place. The world exploded into light. A column of blue shot upward, piercing the ceiling, and the song hit a piercing crescendo, shattering her senses. She fell back, shielding her eyes as the walkers dissolved into the beam, their forms stretching into threads of silver that spiraled skyward. The chamber stabilized, but the air crackled with static, thick with the scent of ozone and something sweeter, jasmine. No, coca leaves, an offering to the gods. Tupa clutched her shoulder, his face a mix of awe and fear. You did it, Nina. The bridge is open. Elena scrambled to her feet, staring at the pedestal. The slab was fused to it now, its symbols dim but etched permanently into the stone. The light above faded, revealing a jagged hole to the night sky, stars blazing, sharper than she'd ever seen. And there at the edge of the hole, a shimmer, a silhouette of a walker, watching. "What's on the other side?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. Tupa shook his head. "We'll know soon. They're here." A shadow moved near the stairs. Elena tensed, expecting Marcus, but it was Javier, her pilot, his smirk gone, his face pale. "Doc, you gotta see this," he said, breathless. "The lines, they're moving." She followed him up, Tupa trailing behind, and emerged into a desert transformed. The Nazca lines glowed across the plateau, their paths shifting like liquid light, rearranging into new patterns, spirals, grids, shapes no human hand could have carved. The hum was softer now, a melody woven into the wind, and in the distance, more walkers appeared, gliding across the sand, their silver forms reflecting a sky that burned with unfamiliar stars. Marcus stirred below, his groans faint but growing stronger. The order of the saffron veil would come for him and the slab. Elena clutched the carved Chicana Tupa had dropped, its weight a tether to the moment. The test wasn't over. The bridge was open, the keepers had returned, and the song was far from finished. She turned to Tupa, then Javier. "We need to move. Whatever's coming, we're in it now." The desert stretched before them, alive with light and mystery, a canvas of the past bleeding into the future. The celestial code had sung its first verse, but the chorus was still unwritten. The night air bit at Elena's skin as she stepped onto the plateau, the desert wind tearing a strange, electric tang like rain, about to break over a land that hadn't seen it in centuries. The Nazca lines shimmered beneath her boots, their glowing trenches alive with motion, snaking across the sand in patterns that defied geometry. The monkey's tail curled tighter, the hummingbird's wings stretched wider, and the starburst she'd uncovered pulsed like a beacon, its blue light stabbing into a sky thick with stars. Too many stars. Elena squinted, her astronomer's eye picking out constellations she knew: Scorpio, the Southern Cross, but others flickered in the gaps, alien clusters that pulsed in time with the hum still ringing in her ears. Javier paced beside her, his usual cockiness replaced by a jittery edge. "Doc, this ain't normal," he said, his voice cracking as he pointed to the walkers gliding silently across the desert. "Those things, they're not human. Not even close. They're not supposed to be," Tupa murmured, leaning on a rock for support, his poncho fluttering in the breeze. Blood matted his gray hair, but his eyes burned with a quiet fire. The Hanan Pachak Wazi, the keepers, came before the Nazca, before the mountains rose. They're the ones who taught us the lines. Elena's mind churned, sifting through years of research. The Nazca, thriving from 100 BC to 700 AD, had scratched these geoglyphs into the desert with uncanny precision, some lines stretching 10 miles, straight as a ruler, others coiling into figures visible only from the sky. Scholars bickered over their purpose: ceremonial paths, water rituals, astronomical markers. But Tupa's words and the slab's awakening rewrote the script. A lock, he'd called it. A bridge. And now the keepers were back, their silver forms drifting like ghosts across a landscape they'd claimed millennia ago. A low groan from the cave snapped her attention. Marcus. He'd be up soon, and with him, the threat of the Order of the Saffron Veil. Elena tightened her grip on the wooden chicana, its four arms and central hull a crude echo of the slab's spiral. "Tupa, you said they judge us. For what, and why now?" The old man straightened, wincing as he pressed a hand to his wound. "The stars," he said, pointing upward. "Every 1,000 years, they align a cycle the Nazca tracked. The keepers left the lines to call them back when the time came, to see if we'd learned." "Learned what?" Javier cut in, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "How to die out here." Tupa's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through the pain. how to live with them. The Nazca tried. Some crossed the bridge, went with the keepers. Others, he trailed off, his gaze drifting to the shifting lines. Others stayed, and the desert took them. Elena's stomach tightened. The Nazca's collapsed drought, salinized soil, a civilization vanishing into dust. What if it wasn't just nature's cruelty? What if they'd faced this test and botched it? She glanced at the walkers, their movements hypnotic, almost deliberate. One paused near the spider geoglyph, its silver hand brushing the glowing trench. The sand rippled, and the spider's legs stretched, as if waking from a long sleep. A distant rumble broke the trance tires on gravel, engines growling. Headlights pierced the darkness beyond the plateau, 3 black SUVs tearing across the desert. Elena's pulse spiked. "The order," she said, her voice low. "They found us." Javier cursed, kicking a rock. "How? We're miles from anything." "Marcus," Tupa said grimly. "He's their hound. They've been watching the lines, waiting for the alignment." Elena spun toward the cave, but before she could move, Marcus staggered out, clutching his head. Blood crusted his temple, and his gray eyes gleamed with a manic edge. "You should have killed me, Voss," he rasped, a crooked grin splitting his face. "Now you're out of time." The SUV screeched to a halt, doors flying open. 6 figures emerged, clad in dark robes edged with saffron gold threads glinting in the headlights. Their faces were masked, featureless except for slits for eyes, and they moved with a precision that screamed military training. One carried a long, curved staff topped with a spiral symbol eerily, like the slabs. The Order of the Saffron Veil wasn't some crackpot cult. They were organized, armed, and closing in. "Get to the plane," Javier shouted, bolting toward the Cessna a half-mile away. But Elena froze, her eyes locked on the walkers. They didn't react to the newcomers, didn't flinch as the robed figures fanned out, cutting off the escape routes. The hum shifted, its melody sharpening into something urgent, almost a warning. Marcus limped toward the Order, waving a hand. The slabs in the cave. She activated it, bridges open. "Take it now." The staff bearer stepped forward, his voice muffled but commanding. "Secure the chamber. Eliminate the witnesses." 2 robed figures drew pistols, their barrels glinting, while another pair headed for the cave, ignoring the walkers entirely. Elena grabbed Tupa's arm, pulling him behind a boulder. "They don't see them," she whispered, her heart hammering. "The keepers, why aren't they stopping this?" Tupa's breath rattled. "They don't care about thieves. Only the test matters. You place the slab, you're the one they watch." A gunshot cracked, and Javier yelped, diving behind a dune as sand exploded near his feet. Elena's mind raced. The plane was too far, the cave compromised. She clutched the chicana, its edges digging into her palm. The lines were moving faster now, the starburst expanding, its light pulsing in sync with the strange stars overhead. The alignment wasn't just a moment, it was a window, and it was closing. "We need to fight," she said, scanning the terrain. A shallow trench ran nearby, part of the shifting hummingbird glyph. "Tupa, can you run?" He nodded, gripping his wooden carving like a talisman. "To the sanctuary. The lines will guide us." They darted from the boulder, keeping low as bullets whizzed overhead. The walkers turned, their void eyes tracking Elena, but they didn't interfere. The trench swallowed them, its glowing walls cool to the touch, the hum vibrating through her boots. "Behind," Marcus shouted orders, his voice fading as the Order split, half chasing them, half storming the cave. The trench twisted, leading them deeper into the plateau. Elena's lungs burned, but she pushed on, Tupa's labored breathing beside her. The lines weren't random, they were a network, a maze etched by a people who'd known something humanity forgot. Ahead, the trench widened into a circular depression, its center marked by a flat stone slab not glowing, but ancient, weathered, etched with the Chicana's cross. "The sanctuary," Tupa panted, collapsing against the stone. "Older than the Nazca. The keeper's first mark. Elena knelt, brushing dirt from the slab. It wasn't like the one in the cave, no symbols, no light, but it felt alive, resonating with the song now swelling around them. The walkers appeared at the circle's edge, silent, their silver forms reflecting the shifting lines. The voice returned, softer but piercing. The bridge widens. Choose. Footsteps crunched behind them. 3 robed figures emerged, pistols raised, their saffron edges fluttering. The staff-bearer stepped forward, his masked face tilting toward the walkers. "You've gone far enough," he said, his voice a low growl. "Hand over the chicana, and we might let you live." Elena stood, shielding Tupa, the wooden carving tight in her fist. "You don't even know what it does." "We know enough," he replied, raising the staff. Its spiral glowed, mirroring the cave's slab. "The veil has waited since the Nazca fell, since the keepers judged them unworthy. This time we'll cross." A chill ran through her. The Order wasn't just after power, they wanted the bridge, the keeper's world. But why? Conquest? Salvation? The walkers shifted, their circle tightening, and the hum spiked. A single note that made her teeth ache. The ground trembled, and the sanctuary slab cracked, light seeping from the fissures. Tupa grabbed her hand, his voice urgent. "The test isn't over, Nina. The chicana, it's the key. Use it." The staff-bearer lunged, but Elena acted on instinct, slamming the wooden chicana into the stone slab's center. The cracks exploded outward, light surging up in a blinding column, identical to the cave's. The robed figures staggered, shielding their eyes, and the walkers moved fast, their silver hands outstretched. The staff clattered to the ground as its bearer screamed, his form dissolving into threads of light, sucked into the column. His companions fired, but the bullets melted midair, and they too vanished, pulled into the beam. The song roared, a symphony of dissonant beauty, and the lines across the desert flared, their shapes merging into a single, vast spiral. Elena shielded her eyes, the chicana still in her grasp, its wood now warm and glowing. The walkers surrounded them, their void eyes locked on her. The voice a chorus now. "The bridge is yours. Step forward or seal it." Tupa slumped, his strength fading. "They're giving you the choice, Nina." The Nazca didn't have it, they failed. "You can end it or go." Elena's breath caught. "End it, close the bridge. Bury the keeper's return. Let the desert sleep again. Or step forward, cross into the unknown, face whatever lay beyond." The light pulsed, the spiral tightened, and in the distance, she heard Javier's shout, alive, still fighting. Marcus and the Order were out there, regrouping, and the stars above burned brighter, the alignment peaking. She looked at the chicana, then the walkers, their silver forms shimmering with promise and threat. The test wasn't over, it was hers to finish. But how? The light from the sanctuary slab seared Elena's retinas, a pillar of blue that clawed at the sky, its edges fraying into tendrils that lashed the air like a storm about to break. The walkers stood motionless at the circle's edge, their silver bodies reflecting the chaos, their void eyes pinning her in place. The voice now a chorus of whispers, sharp as glass, rolled through her mind. "The bridge is yours. Step forward, or seal it." The wooden chicana pulsed in her hand, its glow syncing with the hum that shook the ground. A song older than the mountains, older than the dust beneath her boots. Elena's chest heaved, her breath ragged, as the weight of the choice crushed down on her. Tupa slumped against the cracked slab, his weathered face slick with sweat and blood, his voice a faint rasp. "Nina, it's now or never." The alignment's fading look. He pointed a trembling finger skyward, where the alien stars flickered, their brilliance dimming as the familiar constellations crept back into dominance. The window was closing, the keeper's return hinging on her next move. Elena's gaze darted to the desert beyond the sanctuary. The Nazca lines writhed like living things, their glowing trenches twisting into a tightening spiral that mirrored the Chicana's cross. In the distance, Javier's silhouette ducked behind a dune, his shouts swallowed by the wind as more headlights stabbed through the darkness. The order wasn't done reinforcements, maybe, or Marcus rallying his shattered crew. The walkers didn't react. Their focus locked on her, as if the human squabbles were ants beneath their notice. A memory flashed her first dig in Peru, a Nazca burial site near Palpa, unearthing a pottery shard painted with a spiral and a star. The guide, a local elder, had called it Intik Puncha, the Day of the Sun, a myth of celestial visitors who'd gifted the Nazca knowledge, then vanished when the people grew greedy. Scholars dismissed it as folklore, but now, with the keeper's silver forms towering over her, Elena wondered if the Nazca had faced this exact moment and faltered. She tightened her grip on the chacana, its wood thrumming with heat. "Tupa, if I step forward, what's waiting? Heaven? Hell?" He coughed, a wet, painful sound, but his eyes held hers. Not heaven, not hell. Hanan Pasha, the upper world, the keeper's realm. The Nazca believed it's where the worthy go to learn, to become. But the bridge isn't one way. What comes back? He trailed off, his gaze flickering to the walkers. A sharp crack split the air a rifle shot. Sand exploded near the sanctuary's edge, and Javier's voice cut through. "Doc, move your ass. They're coming." He sprinted toward them, his lanky frame weaving as bullets chased his heels. Behind him, two robed figures emerged from the glowing lines, their saffron-edged cloaks billowing, pistols spitting fire. A third figure loomed Marcus, limping but upright, a jagged knife in his hand, his face twisted with rage. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't fight and decide not with the order closing in. "Javier, get Tupa out," she yelled, shoving the old man toward the pilot. Javier skidded to a stop, hesitating, but Tupa waved him off. "No, Nina, I stay. You go," Tupa said, forcing himself upright. "The keepers need one of us here." Before she could argue, Marcus's voice rang out, closer now. "You're done, Voss. The Veil owns this now." He charged, knife gleaming, his goons flanking him. The walkers shifted, their silver hands rising, and the air thickened, slowing the bullets mid-flight. But Marcus kept coming, his momentum unbroken. Elena made her choice not with logic, but with the gut instinct that had carried her through a dozen digs. She lunged for the light, slamming the chacana against the slab's glowing core. The column erupted, a shockwave hurling her backward as the walkers surged forward, their forms merging into the beam. The voice roared, "You have stepped." The bridge opens wide, the world tilted. Elena hit the sand, her vision swimming, but she felt it a pull, like gravity flipping upside down. The sanctuary slab shattered, and the light spiraled upward, dragging her with it. She clawed at the ground, but her fingers slipped, and then she was rising, weightless, the desert shrinking below. Tupa's cry faded, Javier's shouts dissolved, and Marcus's furious scream cut off as the beam swallowed her whole. Darkness, then light blinding, infinite. Elena floated, her body adrift in a void that shimmered with silver threads, like a tapestry of stars woven by a mad god. The walkers reappeared, solid now, their forms towering over her, their void eyes softening into something almost human. The hum was gone, replaced by silence so deep it pressed against her eardrums. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come, only thought, raw and unfiltered. "Where am I?" The answer came not in words, but images flashing, vivid, overwhelming. A city of silver spires piercing a sky of swirling nebulae, figures like the keepers, moving in harmony, their hands shaping light into forms she couldn't name. A desert, not hers, dotted with lines that glowed red, then blue, then gold. And the Nazca, her Nazca kneeling before these beings, offering woven cloths and coca leaves, their faces alight with awe. The keepers had come before, taught them, judged them, Some had crossed, their bodies dissolving into silver, ascending to this place. Others stayed, and the lines remained, a promise or a trap. Elena's mind reeled. Hanan Pacha, the upper world. Not a myth, but a reality, a dimension tethered to Earth by the lines and the alignment. The Chicana burned in her hand, its glow a lifeline back to the desert. She felt the test still hanging over her, not complete, but evolving. The keepers watched, their silence a question. What now? A jolt ripped through her, and the void shifted. She plummeted, the silver thread snapping, and landed hard on sand, real sand, gritty and warm. The desert sprawled around her, the lines dimmer now, their spiral frozen mid-twist. The sanctuary was gone, a smoking crater in its place, and the walkers stood at its edge, their forms flickering. Tupa lay nearby, unconscious but breathing, the wooden Chicana clutched to his chest. Javier knelt beside him, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Doc, what the hell was that?" he stammered, staring at her like she'd grown wings. Elena pushed herself up, her legs wobbly, the Chicana's glow fading in her grip. "The bridge," she said, her voice hoarse. "I crossed it. They showed me." A scream cut her off. Marcus, pinned beneath a walker's silver hand, his knife useless against its shimmering form. The Order's remnants circled, their robes tattered, their weapons spent. The staff-bearer was gone, but a new figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, her saffron cloak pristine, her face unmasked, sharp and ageless. She carried no weapon, only a small, spiral-carved box that pulsed with the same light as the slab. "You've opened it," she said, her voice smooth as silk, her eyes locked on Elena. "But you don't control it. The veil does." The walkers turned, their void eyes shifting between Elena and the woman. The hum returned, faint but rising, and the lines trembled, as if sensing a new player in the test. Elena clutched the Chicana, her mind racing. She'd seen the Keeper's world, felt their judgment, but the bridge wasn't hers alone. The Order knew more than she'd guessed, and Marcus's betrayal was just the start. The woman raised the box, its spiral glowing, and the air warped, pulling at the walkers. The Nazca failed because they hesitated, she said. "We won't." Elena stepped forward, the Chicana flaring in response. "You don't get it, it's not about winning. It's about choosing." The desert quaked, the spiral tightening, and the keepers moved, their silver forms splitting half toward Elena, half toward the woman. The test wasn't over, it was splitting, a duel of wills under the fading alignment. Javier dragged Tupa back, shouting her name, but Elena stood her ground, the Chicana her anchor, the bridge her battlefield. The woman smiled, cold and certain, and opened the box. The desert air crackled as the woman opened the spiral-carved box, a pulse of golden light spilling out, clashing with the blue glow of the Nazca lines. Elena staggered, the Chicana in her hand flaring hot, its wooden edges trembling as if alive. The walkers split further, their silver forms caught between two forces, half drifting toward the woman, half encircling Elena, their void eyes flickering with an unreadable intent. The hum swelled into a duet, two melodies weaving together, one sharp and commanding from the box, the other deep and mournful from the lines. The spiral in the sand tightened, its edges glowing molten red, as if the earth itself were choosing sides. The woman's voice cut through the chaos, calm and piercing. "You think you understand them, Dr. Voss. The Keepers don't care about your curiosity or your courage. They want obedience, something the Nazca forgot, and you're about to repeat." She raised the box higher, and the golden light sharpened into threads, lashing at the walkers like reins. Several bent, their silver forms bowing, and the air thickened with a scent Elena couldn't place. Saffron, yes, but mixed with something ancient, like incense burned in forgotten temples. Elena's knees buckled under the weight of the Chicana, but she held firm, her mind racing. The woman's words stung obedience. Was that the test? The Nazca had built the lines with precision, offered their lives to the desert, yet they'd vanished. Had they rebelled, or had they knelt too low? She glanced at Tupa, slumped in Javier's arms, his chest rising faintly. His words echoed, "It's trust, Nina. They left it for us to choose. Not submission, but faith in themselves, in the keepers, in something bigger." "Who are you?" Elena demanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The order, what do you even want?" The woman tilted her head, her ageless face catching the light, sharp cheekbones, eyes like polished obsidian. "I am Lyrian, voice of the Veil," she said. "We've watched the stars since the Nazca fell, since their arrogance broke the bridge. We've prepared centuries of study, sacrificed to claim what they lost. The Keeper's world isn't for dreamers like you. It's for those who command." A chill snaked down Elena's spine. Command. The Order didn't want to cross the bridge, they wanted to conquer it. She saw it now. The staff, the box, their military precision. They'd twisted the Nazca's legacy into a weapon, a key to dominate what the Keepers offered. But the walkers weren't bowing fully, some resisted, their silver hands raised toward Elena, their light pulsing in sync with the Chacana. Marcus struggled under the walker, pinning him, his knife scraping uselessly against its form. "Lyrian, finish her," he spat, his voice raw with desperation. "She's stalling, take it now." Lyrian ignored him, her focus locked on Elena. The box's threads tightened, and the desert groaned, the spiral cracking open at its center. A void yawned, a black maw rimmed with golden light, pulling at the air, the sand, the walkers, the bridge, forced wide, not by trust, but by force. The Keepers wavered, their forms flickering, and the hum fractured, dissonance tearing at Elena's ears. Javier shouted, dragging Tupa back. "Doc, she's breaking it! Do something!" Elena's heart pounded. The Chicana burned, its glow a beacon against the chaos. She saw the Nazca in her mind, not as failures, but as seekers. They'd carved the lines to connect, to reach beyond the desert's harsh embrace. The Keepers hadn't judged them unworthy, they judged their choice. Some crossed, some stayed, and the lines endured, a testament to their courage. Lyrian wanted control, but the test wasn't about power, it was about balance. She stepped forward, the Chicana raised, its light flaring blue to match the lines. "You're wrong," she said, her voice ringing over the wind. "The Keepers don't want slaves or masters. They want partners. The Nazca chose, and so do I." She slammed the Chicana into the sand, at the spiral's edge, not to command, but to join. The ground erupted, blue light surging up, clashing with Lyrian's gold. The walkers moved fast, their silver forms weaving between the beams, merging the colors into a shimmering white. The hum unified, a single note of piercing clarity, and the void shuddered, its edges softening. The bridge wasn't breaking, it was shifting, responding. Lyrian's calm fractured, her eyes widening. "No, you can't." She thrust the box forward, its threads snapping, but the walkers turned on her, their hands outstretched. The golden light recoiled, coiling back into the box, and Lyrian screamed as it burned her hands, the spiral searing her flesh. She dropped it, staggering, and the void pulsed, drawing the box in. It vanished with a sound like a sigh, and the walkers stepped back, their forms steadying. Elena fell to her knees, the Chicana dimming in her grip, its wood cool once more. The spiral stabilized, its red glow fading to a soft blue, the lines settling into a new pattern, a Chicana, vast and radiant, stretching across the plateau. The Keepers stood at its arms, their void eyes softening into stars, and the voice returned, gentle now. "You have chosen. The bridge stands." The desert quieted, the wind dying to a whisper. Javier stumbled over, Tupa in his arms, the old man stirring awake. "Nina," Tupa rasped, a faint smile breaking through. "You did it. Like they did." Elena looked up, the alien stars fading, the alignment passing. The walkers began to dissolve, their silver threads rising into the sky, but one lingered, its hand brushing the sand. A shape formed a small woven cloth, Nazca style, its threads shimmering with starlight. A gift? A promise? She took it, its weight impossibly light, and felt a warmth spread through her, a connection, not just to the keepers, but to the people who'd walked. Story 4. The Serpent's Codex. The sun blazed over the Valley of Mexico, casting jagged shadows across the ancient city of Teotihuacan. Its pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the sprawling Avenue of the Dead stood like silent sentinels, their weathered stones whispering secrets older than time. Dust swirled in the dry wind, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth, as Dr. Ilana Vasquez adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and squinted at the horizon. An archaeologist with a Ph.D. from UCLA and a stubborn streak a mile wide, Elena had spent years chasing the ghosts of Mesoamerica. But today, beneath the blistering midday heat, she felt something different, a pull, like the earth itself was tugging at her boots. It started 3 weeks ago, when a local farmer stumbled into her camp near San Juan Teotihuacan, his hands trembling as he clutched a shard of obsidian carved with glyphs no one could read. Elena recognized the style, pre-Aztec, maybe Toltec, but with an eerie twist, serpentine coils weaving through the symbols like a living thing. The farmer muttered about a tunnel collapse near the Pyramid of the Sun, a hidden passage exposed by a sinkhole. The Mexican government had sealed it off, calling it unstable, but Elena wasn't the type to let bureaucracy stop her. She'd bribed a guard, slipped past the barricades, and now stood at the tunnel's mouth, a jagged gash in the earth framed by cracked basalt. Her flashlight beam danced across the walls as she descended, revealing faint murals of feathered serpents Quetzalcoatl, the god of wind and wisdom, his scales shimmering in faded reds and golds. The air grew thick, heavy with the musk of centuries, and her pulse quickened. At 38, Elena had excavated her share of ruins, from Chichen Itza to Palenque. But this felt different. The tunnel sloped downward, narrowing until she had to crouch, her knees scraping against the stone. Then, abruptly, it opened into a chamber. She froze. The room was circular, its ceiling domed like a starry sky, studded with mica flecks that glittered in her light. In the center stood a basalt altar, its surface etched with a sprawling codex, a maze of glyphs and serpentine lines radiating outward like a spider web. Beside it lay a skeleton, its bones draped in tattered feathers, clutching a jade pendant shaped like a coiled snake. Elena's breath hitched. This wasn't just a find, it was a revelation. Teotihuacan's origins were a mystery. Scholars debated whether the Toltecs, the Aztecs, or some unknown people built it, but this codex could rewrite history. Elena, you in there? A voice crackled through her radio. It was Miguel, her grad student and right-hand man, a wiry 20-something with a knack for tech and a grin that could charm a rattlesnake. He'd stayed topside to monitor the seismograph, paranoid about another collapse. Yeah, and you won't believe this, she replied, her voice echoing off the walls. I've got a codex, intact, and something else. Get down here. Minutes later, Miguel scrambled in, his dark eyes widening as he took in the chamber. Holy crap, Doc. That's no ordinary altar. Look at the edges. Those cuts are too precise. This isn't hand-carved, it's machined. Elena frowned, running her fingers along the altar's rim. He was right. The stone gleamed with an unnatural smoothness, like it'd been sliced by a laser. Her mind raced. Teotihuacan thrived around 200 AD, long before such technology existed, or so they thought. She pulled out her notebook and started sketching the codex, her hands trembling with excitement. The glyphs were a mix of familiar symbols, stars, Jaguars, mays, and others she'd never seen. Jagged lines like lightning, circles within circles, a serpent swallowing its own tail. As she worked, a low hum vibrated through the chamber, so faint she thought she'd imagined it. Then the jade pendant on the skeleton glowed a soft, pulsing green. Miguel yelped, stumbling back. "What the hell is that?" Before Elena could answer, footsteps echoed from the tunnel. She spun, her flashlight catching a figure in black, a man, tall and lean, his face obscured by a hood. He moved with a predator's grace, a silenced pistol gleaming in his hand. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "You found something you shouldn't have. Who are you?" she demanded, stepping in front of the altar. Miguel edged toward her, his hand slipping into his pack for a trowel. "Pathetic, but better than nothing." The man chuckled, lowering his hood to reveal sharp cheekbones and eyes like cold steel. "Call me Reyes. The first represent interests. That codex belongs to us. Step aside, or I'll bury you with it." Elena's gut twisted. She'd heard rumors of a group, the Order of the Obsidian Blade, a shadowy cabal obsessed with Mesoamerican relics, claiming descent from Aztec priests. Most scholars dismiss them as myth, but Reyes's presence suggested otherwise. "This is a scientific find," she said, stalling. "It belongs to the world." Reyes smirked. "The world isn't ready for what's coming. That codex isn't just history, it's a key. And you're in my way." Before she could argue, the hum grew louder, rattling the chamber. The altar shuddered, and the codex's glyphs flared with golden light. Reyes cursed, his gun wavering, as the pendant's glow intensified. Elena's notebook slipped from her hands as visions flooded her mind, cities burning, skies darkening, a feathered serpent uncoiling from the earth, its roar shaking the stars. She gasped, clutching her head, while Miguel shouted her name. When the visions cleared, Reyes was gone, vanished like smoke. But the chamber had changed. The skeleton was upright, its bony fingers clutching the pendant, its skull tilted as if watching her. The codex pulsed, its glyphs shifting like a living script. Elena staggered to her feet, her heart pounding. "Miguel, get the camera. We need to document this now." He nodded, fumbling with his gear, but his hands shook. "Doc, that wasn't natural. That thing moved. And those visions, what did you see?" "Same as you, I bet," she muttered, though she wasn't sure. The images lingered, prophetic, apocalyptic, tied to Quetzalcoatl's return. She'd studied the myths, the feathered serpent god who'd left Mexico in 987 AD, vowing to return in a year of one read. The next one read cycle was 25 months away. Coincidence? She didn't believe in coincidences. Hours later, they emerged into twilight, the codex's photos safely stored on Miguel's hard drive. But the pendant was gone, stolen by Reyes, Elena guessed. She cursed herself for not grabbing it, but the codex was the real prize. Back at their camp, a ramshackle tent surrounded by cacti, she pored over the images with Miguel and their third wheel, Xocotl Xio Morales, a Nahua elder and local guide. Xiu's weathered face, framed by silver braids, creased as he studied the glyphs. "This is old," he said, his voice gravelly. "Older than Teotihuacan. The serpent's mark, it's a warning. Quetzalcoatl didn't just leave. He was banished, sealed away. That codex, it's a map to his prison." Elena leaned forward, her exhaustion forgotten. "A prison? Where?" Xiu traced a glyph, a circle pierced by lightning. "Under the earth. Deep. The Toltecs built this city to guard it, not worship it. But the seal's weakening. You felt it, didn't you?" She nodded, the hum still echoing in her bones. Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "So, what? We've got a pissed-off god waking up, and that Reyes guy wants to help it, or control it," Elena said grimly. "The Order's been after power like this for centuries. If they've got the pendant..." A shadow fell across the tent flap. Elena grabbed her trowel, but it was too late. Reyes stepped in, flanked by two goons in tactical gear, their guns trained on the trio. The pendant hung around his neck, glowing faintly. "You're half right, Doctor," he said. "We don't want to free Quetzalcoatl. We want his power. The Codex tells us how to bind him permanently. Hand it over, or your friends die." Miguel lunged, trowel raised, but a goon slammed him to the ground. Shu stood calmly, his eyes locked on Reyes. "You think you can chain a god? The serpent sees you, boy. It's already awake." The pendant flared, and the ground trembled. Outside, the pyramid of the sun loomed against a blood-red sky, its peak shrouded in unnatural mist. Elena clutched the hard drive, her mind racing. The Codex wasn't just a map, it was a ritual, a code to unleash or imprison Quetzalcoatl. Reyes wanted domination. Shu feared chaos. But what did she want? Truth? Survival? The visions haunted her fire. Darkness. A serpent's endless coils. Reyes advanced, his pistol aimed at her chest. "Last chance, Vasquez." The tent shook as the tremor intensified, dust raining from the ceiling. A roar, deep, primal, rumbled from the earth, and the Codex's glyphs burned in Elena's memory. The climax was here, the mystery unraveling, but the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. She tightened her grip on the hard drive, her choice looming like the shadow of the pyramid itself. The tent shuddered as the roar from the earth crescendoed, a sound like thunder trapped in a cavern, primal and alive. Elena's grip on the hard drive tightened, her knuckles whitening as Reyes' pistol hovered inches from her chest. The pendant around his neck pulsed with green fire, casting jagged shadows across his sharp features. Miguel groaned on the ground, clutching his bruised ribs, while Shu stood statue still, his silver braids glinting in the flickering lantern light. Outside, the pyramid of the sun loomed through the tent flap, its silhouette swallowed by a swirling mist that shouldn't exist in the arid Mexican night. "You're out of time, Vasquez," Reyes snapped, his voice cutting through the tremor. "The Codex. Now." Elena's mind raced. The glyphs from the altar flashing behind her eyes, circles within circles. Lightning piercing stone, a serpent's jaws snapping shut. They weren't just a map or a ritual. They were a warning, a lock and key to something ancient and unstoppable. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, wasn't a myth to be dissected in lecture halls. He was real, and he was waking up. Reyes thought he could harness that power, but Shu's words echoed in her skull. "The serpent sees you." She glanced at the Nawa elder, his dark eyes unreadable but steady, like he'd faced gods before and lived to tell it. The ground bucked again, and one of Reyes's goons stumbled, his gun clattering against a folding table. Elena seized the moment, lunging forward and slamming her trowel into Reyes's wrist. He snarled, the pistol firing wild, the silenced shot punching a hole in the tent's canvas. Miguel rolled to his feet, tackling the second goon, while Shu grabbed a machete from his belt and slashed at the first. Chaos erupted in the cramped space, grunts, curses, the metallic tang of blood as the lantern toppled, plunging them into a dance of shadows. Elena darted for the tent flap, the hard drive clutched to her chest. She burst into the night, the air thick with dust and the electric hum of something unnatural. The mist around the pyramid of the sun churned, streaked with veins of green light, and the avenue of the dead stretched before her like a blackened scar. Footsteps pounded behind her, Reyes, limping but relentless, the pendant swinging like a pendulum. "You can't run from this," he shouted, his voice swallowed by another earth-shaking roar. She didn't stop. Her boots slapped the dirt as she sprinted toward the pyramid, its bulk a beacon in the chaos. If the Codex was a key, the altar was the lock. She had to get back to the chamber, decipher the glyphs, and figure out what the hell was happening before Reyes turned a god into his personal weapon. The sinkhole loomed ahead, a gaping wound in the earth, and she skidded to a halt, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness as she descended once more. The tunnel felt alive now, its walls trembling, the murals of Quetzalcoatl seeming to writhe in the flickering light. Feathers shimmered, scales glinted, and the god's eyes painted in obsidian black followed her every step. She stumbled into the chamber, breathless, and found it transformed. The altar glowed, its glyphs pulsing in sync with the pendant's rhythm, now miles away with Rhea's. The skeleton still sat upright, its bony grip on empty air where the jade piece once rested, its skull tilted in silent judgment. Elena dropped to her knees, spreading the hard drive's photos across the floor. Her hands shook as she traced the symbols, piecing together fragments of meaning. The Toltecs, or whoever built this place, hadn't worshipped Quetzalcoatl here. They'd feared him. The Codex spoke of a betrayal, the god, exiled by his kin, bound beneath the earth in a prison of stone and starlight. The pendant was the seal, the Codex the incantation to reinforce it or break it. But why now? Why 2025? A shadow fell across the photos. She spun, expecting Reyes, but it was Shu, his machete dripping red, his chest heaving. Miguel's holding them off, he rasped, but not for long. What did you find? It's a containment ritual, she said, her voice hoarse. Quetzalcoatl's trapped under Teotihuacan. The Codex can keep him there, or let him out. Reyes wants the latter, but he's a fool. This isn't about control, it's about balance. Shu nodded, his gaze drifting to the altar. The elders told stories. The serpent wasn't evil, just too powerful. The world wasn't ready then. Maybe it still isn't. Before she could respond, the chamber lurched, and a crack split the dome overhead. Mica flecks rained down, glittering like fallen stars, as a voice not human, not animal rumbled through the stone. It was a language Elena didn't know, yet it sank into her bones, heavy with rage and sorrow. The skeleton's jaw clacked open, and a gust of wind howled from its throat, carrying the scent of ozone and blood. "Doc!" Miguel's shout echoed from the tunnel, followed by gunfire. He staggered in, blood streaking his arm, Reyes and his goons on his heels. The Order leader's face was a mask of fury, the pendant now blazing like a tiny sun. "You can't stop this," he roared, shoving Miguel aside. "The serpent's mine." The altar flared, and the chamber became a battlefield. Reyes lunged for Elena, but Shu intercepted, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. Miguel grabbed a loose stone, hurling it at a goon, while Elena scrambled to protect the photos. The voice grew louder, a chorus of whispers weaving through the chaos. Freedom, betrayal, reckoning. The glyphs shifted faster, forming new patterns, and Elena's vision blurred with another flood of images. Teotihuacan in flames, a serpent uncoiling from the earth, its wings blotting out the moon. She stumbled to the altar, slamming her hands against its surface. The stone burned, searing her palms, but she held on, shouting the glyphs she'd memorized, half prayer, half desperation. The hum peaked, a deafening wail, and the pendant around Reyes's neck shattered, its fragments spiraling into the air. He screamed, clawing at his chest as green light erupted from the shards, arcing toward the altar. The skeleton crumbled to dust, and the chamber stilled almost. A low pulse lingered deep in the earth, like a heartbeat. Reyes slumped, unconscious, his goons frozen in shock. Miguel panted, clutching his arm, while Shu sheathed his machete, his eyes locked on Elena. "Did you do it?" he asked. "Did you seal him?" She stared at her blistered hands, the Codex's glow fading. "I don't know," she whispered. "I think I paused it, but he's still down there, and he's awake." Outside, the mist thickened, curling around the pyramid of the sun like a lover's embrace. The ground trembled faintly, a promise or a threat. Elena gathered the photos, her mind spinning with questions. The Codex had more to say, secrets buried in its shifting lines. Reyes was down, but the Order wouldn't stop. And Quetzalcoatl? He was watching, waiting, his presence a shadow over the valley. She turned to Shu and Miguel, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her gut. "We need to get out of here. Regroup. Figure out the rest of this thing before they do." As they climbed from the tunnel, the night sky shimmered with unnatural light, and a distant hiss, soft, serpentine drifted on the wind. The mystery wasn't solved. It was growing, coiling tighter around them all. The night air hit Elena like a slap, thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the faint, musky undertone of something ancient stirring beneath the soil. The mist coiled around the pyramid of the sun, its tendrils glowing faintly green, as if the earth itself were exhaling Quetzalcoatl's breath. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she emerged from the sinkhole, Miguel and Shu close behind, their silhouettes jagged against the unnatural shimmer of the sky. The hard drive felt like a lead weight in her pack, the Codex's secrets burning in her mind, half deciphered, half alive, a puzzle that could save the world or end it. Miguel clutched his bleeding arm, his face pale but set with that stubborn grit she'd come to rely on. "Doc, we're screwed, right? That thing's awake, and Reyes might be down, but his buddies aren't gonna just shrug and go home." Elena glanced back at the tunnel, where Reyes lay unconscious amid his stunned goons. "We've got a head start," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But yeah, the order's not done, and neither's the serpent." Sue adjusted his machete, his silver braids swaying as he scanned the horizon. The pyramid of the moon loomed to the north, its peak swallowed by the mist, while the avenue of the dead stretched eastward, flanked by crumbling temples like a graveyard of forgotten gods. "This isn't just Teotihuacan anymore," he murmured. "The valley's waking up. The old places, San Juan, Otumba, even Tenochtitlan, they'll feel it too." Elena's stomach twisted. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital buried beneath modern Mexico City, was 2 hours away by car. If Quetzalcoatl's prison stretched that far, they weren't dealing with a single site, they were standing on a fault line of mythic proportions. She pulled out her phone. The screen cracked but functional, and checked the seismograph app Miguel had synced earlier. The readings spiked, tremors radiating from Teotihuacan in waves, subtle but growing. "This isn't tectonic," she said. "It's him." A hiss slithered through the air, low and serpentine, raising the hairs on her neck. The mist pulsed, and for a heartbeat, she swore she saw a shape massive, feathered, its wings brushing the stars before it dissolved into the haze. "We need to move," she said, shoving the phone into her pocket. "Back to the truck. We've got the Codex data, let's get somewhere safe and crack the rest of it." They bolted across the avenue of the dead, the ancient stones slick underfoot, the mist nipping at their heels like a living thing. The truck, a battered Ford pickup, was parked near a cluster of agave plants, its rusted frame a lifeline in the chaos. Miguel slid into the driver's seat, wincing as he gripped the wheel, while Shu took shotgun, his machete resting across his lap. Elena climbed into the bed, bracing herself against the side as the engine sputtered to life. The tires kicked up dust as they peeled out, the pyramids shrinking in the rear view. But the mist followed, a slow, deliberate creep, and the ground shivered beneath them. Elena clung to the truck's edge, her mind racing. The Codex's glyphs danced in her memory, lightning, circles, a serpent swallowing its tail. She'd stopped the pendant's power, maybe delayed Quetzalcoatl's rise, but the seal was fraying. The Toltecs had built Teotihuacan as a cage, not a temple, and the Aztecs who came later had revered the serpent without knowing the truth. Now, in 2025, the year of one reed, the prophecy was unraveling. The truck jolted over a rut, snapping her back to the moment. Headlights pierced the darkness as they barreled toward San Juan Teotihuacan, the sleepy town's lights flickering in the distance. "Where we headed, Doc?" Miguel called over the roar of the engine. "Shu's place," she shouted back. "It's close, and we need a base. Plus, he's got contacts, elders, maybe even a Codex expert. We're flying blind without more intel." Shu nodded, his expression grim. "My cousin in Mexico City might help. He's a curator at the Anthropology Museum, knows the old texts. But the Order's got eyes everywhere. We won't be safe long." The truck screeched into San Juan, its narrow streets lined with adobe houses and flickering streetlights. Shu's home was a squat, Single-story building on the edge of town, its walls plastered with peeling paint and its yard littered with rusted tools. They piled out, adrenaline still pumping, and ducked inside. The interior smelled of sage and old wood, a mix of traditional Nahua decor woven rugs, clay pots and modern clutter, a laptop, stacks of books, a radio crackling with static. Elena dumped her pack on a table, pulling out the hard drive and hooking it to Shu's laptop. The codex photos filled the screen, their golden glow eerie in the dim room. Miguel slumped into a chair, wrapping his arm with a rag, while Shu lit a bundle of copal incense, its smoke curling toward the ceiling. "For protection," he said, catching Elena's skeptical look. "You don't have to believe. The spirits do." She didn't argue. After tonight, belief was less a choice than a necessity. She zoomed in on a glyph cluster, a jaguar claw piercing a star, and cross-referenced it with her notes. "This ties to the Popal view," she muttered. "The Mayan creation myth. Quetzalcoatl's kin, Tezcatlipoca, the jaguar god, banished him after a war in the heavens. The Toltecs must have thought he'd return through the earth, not the sky." Miguel leaned over, squinting at the screen. "So, what's the lightning mean?" "That's all over the codex." "Power," Shu said, his voice low. "Or destruction. The serpent's breath, wind, storms, the force that shaped the world. If he's free, that's what's coming." A knock rattled the door, sharp and insistent. Elena's hand flew to her trowel, but Shu waved her down, peering through a cracked window. "It's Sitlali," he said, relaxing slightly. He opened the door, and a woman stepped in short, wiry, with a hawkish face and a leather satchel slung over her shoulder. Her dark eyes flicked over the room, landing on Elena. "Quetzalcoatl said you found trouble," Sitlali said, her tone dry. "Didn't expect it to be this big." "She's my niece," Shu explained. "Runs a market stall by day, digs up rumors by night. Knows every whisper in the valley." Elena stood, brushing dust off her jeans. "We need help." "The Order of the Obsidian Blade, they're after a codex we found under the Pyramid of the Sun. It's tied to Quetzalcoatl, and he's waking up." Sitlali's eyebrows shot up, but she didn't flinch. "Heard about them. Smugglers. Fanatics say they're rebuilding the Aztec Empire, but with better guns. They've been sniffing around old sites for months. What's the codex do? Keeps him locked or sets him loose?" Elena said, gesturing to the laptop. "We've got part of it figured out, but the rest is a mess. And the Order's not far behind." Sitlali dropped her satchel, pulling out a battered notebook. "Got a lead then. Friend in Otumba saw a convoy black SUVs, armed to the teeth heading west an hour ago. Bet it's your fanatics. They're not subtle." "West?" Miguel frowned. "That's toward Tula, the Toltec capital." Elena's pulse quickened. Tula, where Quetzalcoatl's cult had flourished, where the god was said to have burned himself alive before ascending as the morning star. If the Order had a base there, they might have more than guns. They could have relics, texts, a way to finish what Reyes started. "We need to beat them to it," she said. "If there's another piece of this puzzle, it's in Tula." The radio crackled, cutting through their planning. A voice broke through the static, urgent. Spanish, tremors intensifying across the valley, reports of strange lights near Teotihuacan. Authorities urging calm. The broadcast cut off as the ground heaved, stronger than before. Dust sifted from the ceiling, and the copal smoke twisted into spirals. Outside, dogs howled, and the sky flared green. A streak of lightning splitting the darkness, no thunder, just silence, heavy and wrong. Sitlali cursed under her breath, while Shu gripped his machete, his eyes narrowing. Elena stared at the codex on the screen, its glyphs pulsing faintly, as if mocking her. The serpent wasn't waiting, he was testing the bars of his cage. Tula was their next move, but time was slipping through her fingers like sand. The Order was closing in, the valley was unraveling, and Quetzalcoatl's hiss lingered in the air, a promise of chaos yet to come. The truck's engine growled as it tore through the night, headlights slicing through the thickening mist that clung to the Valley of Mexico like a shroud. Elena crouched in the bed, the wind whipping her hair into a tangled mess, her eyes fixed on the receding glow of Teotihuacan. The Pyramid of the Sun was a fading silhouette now, swallowed by a haze that pulsed with green veins, as if Quetzalcoatl's essence were seeping into the sky itself. The hard drive jostled in her pack, its weight a constant reminder of the Codex's unfinished riddle, a lock, a key, a ticking bomb. Miguel gripped the wheel with one hand, his injured arm stiff but functional, his jaw clenched tight. "Tula's 40 miles, he shouted over the roar. "Road's crap, and this mist's screwing with visibility. We're pushing it, Doc. Just get us there," Elena yelled back, her voice raw. The seismograph app on her phone blinked red, tremors rippling outward from Teotihuacan in erratic bursts. The valley wasn't just waking up, it was cracking open, and Tula, the ancient Toltec capital, might hold the next piece of the puzzle. Quetzalcoatl's cult had thrived there, his legend etched into the city's warrior columns and sprawling plazas. If the Order of the Obsidian Blade was headed that way, they weren't sightseeing. Siu sat shotgun, his machete across his knees, his weathered face carved with focus. Citlali perched beside Elena in the truck bed, her leather satchel bouncing as she scribbled in her notebook. "Tula's got ruins, pyramids, ball courts, the Atlantean statues," she said, her voice cutting through the wind. "But there's rumors too. Caves under the site, sealed since the Toltecs fell. If your codex points anywhere, it's there." Elena nodded, her mind churning. The Toltecs had ruled around 900 AD, their empire a bridge between Teotihuacan's collapse and the Aztecs' rise. Quetzalcoatl, called Topiltzin in some tales, had been their priest king, a figure of wisdom until he fled or burned, depending on the myth. The Codex's glyphs hinted at his banishment, a prison beneath the earth. Tula might be the keyhole, and the Order wanted the key. The truck swerved as Miguel dodged a pothole, the chassis rattling like it might split apart. The mist thickened, curling into shape's feathers, scales, a serpent's eye that dissolved when Elena blinked. A low hiss threaded through the air, sharp and insistent, and the ground shivered beneath the tires. "He's following us," she muttered, gripping the truck's edge. Citlali glanced up, her hawkish eyes narrowing. "Or leading us. The old stories say Quetzalcoatl wasn't just trapped, he was waiting. For the right time, the right people." "Great," Miguel called back. "So we're either his jailers or his welcome party." "Awesome." The road twisted northwest, climbing into scrubland dotted with cacti and jagged hills. The mist thinned slightly, revealing a sky streaked with green lightning, no clouds, no thunder, just silent bolts that lit the horizon like a warning. Elena's phone buzzed another tremor, magnitude 4. 2 centered back at Teotihuacan. She cursed under her breath. Time was slipping away, and the serpent wasn't patient. An hour later, Tula's ruins emerged from the darkness, a sprawl of stone and shadow under the eerie glow. The Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl loomed at the heart of the site, its flat summit crowned by the Atlantean statues, massive basalt warriors, their faces stern, clutching spears and shields. The truck skidded to a stop near a crumbling wall, and Elena vaulted out, her boots hitting the dirt with a thud. The air here was different, charged, heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Shu climbed out, scanning the ruins. "This place remembers," he said, his voice low. "Blood, fire, the serpent's fall. It's still alive." Citlali pointed west, toward a low ridge beyond the pyramid. "The caves are that way locals avoid them. Say they're cursed, full of echoes that don't sound human." Elena adjusted her pack, the hard drive's weight grounding her. "That's where we're going. The Codex mentioned a mouth of stone, could be a cave. If the Order's here, they'll head there too." Miguel grabbed a flashlight from the truck, his arm bandaged but steady. "Let's move then. I'd rather not get ambushed again." They trekked across the site, weaving through the ball court's sunken walls, and past the Chacmol statue, its basin stained with centuries of imagined blood. The Atlantean statues towered overhead, their eyes hollow but watchful, as if guarding secrets carved into their stone hearts. The ground trembled faintly, a pulse that matched the Codex's rhythm in Elena's memory circles. Lightning, a serpent's endless coil. The ridge loomed closer, its base pocked with shadows. Sidlali led them to a narrow crevice, half hidden by scrub brush, its edges worn smooth by time or hands. "This is it," she said, peering inside. Too dark to see the bottom. Elena flicked on her flashlight, its beam swallowed by the blackness. The air wafting up smelled of damp earth, and something sharp or sulfur maybe, or decay. "We're not turning back now," she said, stepping in. The others followed, single file, the crevice narrowing until they had to sidestep, their shoulders brushing cold stone. The passage opened into a cavern, its walls jagged and glistening with moisture. Stalactites hung like teeth, dripping into shallow pools that reflected the flashlight's glow. In the center stood a slab of basalt, its surface etched with glyphs that matched the Codex, a mirror image, but darker, angrier. Serpents twisted around stars, their fangs bared, while lightning bolts pierced a cracked circle. At the slab's base lay a pile of offerings, jade beads, obsidian blades, feathers brittle with age. "Holy crap," Miguel whispered, his beam darting across the walls. "This is it, right? The prison?" Elena knelt by the slab, her fingers tracing the glyphs. "Part of it. This is a seal, a backup, maybe." The Toltecs didn't trust one lock. She pulled out her phone, snapping photos, her heart pounding. The symbols aligned with the Codex, but new ones emerged: jaguar claws, a smoking mirror. Tezcatlipoca again, the trickster god who'd banished Quetzalcoatl. This wasn't just a prison, it was a battlefield etched in stone. Shu crouched beside her, his eyes narrowing. The mirror, its Tezcatlipoca's mark. He's here too, watching. The serpents not alone. A clatter echoed from the crevice boots on stone, voices low and urgent. Elena spun, her flashlight catching glints of black tactical gear. The order. A figure stepped into the cavern, Reyes, battered but alive, his sharp face twisted with fury. The pendant was gone, but he held a new relic, a smoking obsidian mirror, its surface rippling like liquid. Behind him, 6 goons fanned out, guns raised. "You're persistent, Vasquez," Reyes sneered, his voice echoing off the walls. "But you're too late." The serpent's awake, and this, he hefted the mirror, binds him to me. Elena stood, her trowel useless but clutched anyway. "You're delusional. That's Tezcatlipoca's mirror. You're not controlling Quetzalcoatl, you're pissing off his jailer." Reyes laughed, a cold, hollow sound. The Toltecs were weak. They locked him away out of fear. The Order knows better. Power like his belongs to us. The cavern shook, stalactites cracking loose and splashing into the pools. The slab glowed, its glyphs flaring red, then green as the hiss returned louder. Closer, a chorus of rage. Reyes raised the mirror, chanting in a guttural tongue, Nahuatl, maybe, twisted with something older. The air thickened, shadows stretching into claws, and Elena's vision blurred with new images. Tula burning, a jaguar stalking a serpent, the sky splitting open. Miguel lunged at a goon, flashlight swinging, while Sitlali drew a knife from her satchel, slashing at another. Shiu charged Reyes, machete flashing, but the mirror pulsed, and a wave of force knocked him back. Elena dove for the slab, her hands slamming against the glyphs. She shouted the Codex's incantation, her voice cracking, desperate to reinforce the seal or break it, if that's what it took to stop Reyes. The cavern erupted in light red from the slab, green from the mist seeping through the walls, black from the mirror. A roar shook the stone, not one voice but 2 serpent and jaguar, locked in eternal war. Reyes staggered, the mirror cracking, while Elena clung to the slab, her skin blistering. The glyphs burned into her palms, and the cavern became a crucible, the past and present colliding in a storm of fury. The cavern trembled, as if the earth itself were gasping. The clash of light red from the slab, green from the mist, black from Reyes's obsidian mirror painting the walls in a kaleidoscope of fury. Elena's hands burned against the basalt, the glyphs searing into her flesh, but she held fast, her voice hoarse as she chanted the Codex's incantation. The air thickened with the weight of centuries, the hiss of Quetzalcoatl and the snarl of Tezcatlipoca, weaving a duet of rage and sorrow that shook her to her core. This wasn't just a prison, it was a wound, a scar on the soul of the world, and she was tearing it open. Reyes staggered, the mirror in his hands fracturing, its surface rippling like a storm-tossed lake. "You can't stop this," he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "The serpent's power is mine." But the black light faltered, and shadows clawed at him, jaguar-shaped tendrils born from Tezcatlipoca's wrath. The Order's goons froze, guns trembling, as the cavern became a crucible of gods and mortals. Miguel wrestled a goon to the ground, his flashlight cracking against the man's skull, while Citlali danced between two others, her knife flashing in the chaotic glow. Xiu rose from where the mirror's pulse had flung him, his machete steady, and charged Reyes again. The blade met the mirror's edge, and a shockwave erupted, hurling them both back. Stalactites crashed down, shattering into the pools, and the slab beneath Elena pulsed faster, its rhythm a heartbeat she felt in her bones. She closed her eyes, the visions flooding back Teotihuacan aflame, Tula's ruins crumbling, a serpent and jaguar locked in combat beneath a fractured sky. But there was more now, a thread of light, thin but unbroken, weaving through the chaos. The Codex wasn't just a seal or a summons, it was a choice, a plea from the Toltecs to those who'd come after, not to bind or free but to heal. Elena's breath hitched as the realization hit her. Quetzalcoatl wasn't a prisoner to be controlled, he was a force to be understood, a balance to be restored. "Xiu," she shouted, her voice cutting through the din. "It's not about locking him away, it's about letting him go, but on our terms." The Nahua elder met her gaze, his silver braids glinting in the red light. "You sure, girl? That's a hell of a risk." "I'm sure," she said, though her heart pounded with doubt. The Toltecs feared him because they didn't trust him. "We have to." Reyes laughed, a ragged, broken sound, as he climbed to his feet. The cracked mirror still clutched tight. "Trust a god? You're a fool, Vasquez. Power doesn't negotiate." He raised the relic, his chant resuming, and the black light surged again, shadows coiling toward the slab. Elena dug deep, pulling every ounce of her will into the incantation. She altered the words, weaving in glyphs of maze and stars, symbols of creation, not destruction from the Codex's edges. The slab flared, its red glow softening to gold, and the mist thickened, green tendrils curling around her like a caress. The hiss softened too, less rage, more question, as if Quetzalcoatl were listening. The cavern shook harder, cracks spiderwebbing up the walls, and Reyes's chant faltered. The mirror shattered fully, its fragments exploding outward, and he screamed as the shadows turned on him, dragging him to his knees. The goons bolted, abandoning their leader, their footsteps fading into the crevice. Miguel and Citlali stood back to back, panting, while Xiu limped to Elena's side, his machete dripping with sweat and dust. The gold light spread, bathing the cavern in warmth, and the slab's glyphs shifted one last time, serpents uncoiling, lightning fading, a circle whole again. The roar split into two voices, then merged, a harmony of wind and thunder that rattled the soul. Elena's hands lifted from the stone, blistered but steady as the mist condensed into a shape massive, feathered. its scales shimmering like dawn. Quetzalcoatl towered over them, not a monster, but a presence, his eyes ancient and deep. He spoke, not in words, but in waves of meaning that sank into her mind. I am the wind that shapes, the breath that renews. You have chosen not to bind me, nor to break me. What do you seek? Elena swallowed, her throat dry. Balance, she said aloud, for her team as much as the god. The world's changed. You don't belong in a cage or a throne. Help us fix what's broken. The serpent tilted his head, wings rustling, and the cavern stilled. The ground ceased trembling, the mist receding, and a breeze clean, alive swept through the space. Quetzalcoatl's form faded, not gone but diffused, a promise lingering in the air. The slab dimmed, its glyphs settling into a quiet pattern. A story complete but open. Reyes lay crumpled, alive but hollow, the mirror's shards scattered around him. Citlali kicked his gun away, her knife still poised, while Miguel slumped against a stalagmite, grinning weakly. We're not dead. That's a win, right? Shu placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, his voice soft. You did what the Toltecs couldn't. You listened. She nodded, exhaustion crashing over her, but a spark of hope burned beneath it. The Codex was theirs. The order broken for now, and Quetzalcoatl wasn't a threat, but a partner. The valley would heal, and so might they. The sun rose over Tula, its rays piercing the last wisps of mist, casting golden light across the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl and the Atlantean statues. Elena stood at the ruin's edge, her blistered hands wrapped in gauze, the hard drive safe in her pack. Miguel leaned against the truck, his arm in a makeshift sling, cracking jokes with Citlali, who'd already started sketching the cavern's glyphs in her notebook. Shu knelt nearby, burning copal incense, his silver braids swaying as he murmured a prayer not of fear but gratitude. The tremors had stopped, the valley settling into a quiet Elena hadn't felt since she'd first arrived. Reports trickled in from San Juan and Mexico City, no more strange lights, no more cracks in the earth. The Codex rested on Shu's laptop, its photos a testament to what they'd faced, but also what they'd changed. Elena had spent the night deciphering the final glyphs, finding a message buried in the Toltec script. The serpent rises not to destroy, but to remind. The world is yours to mend. She thought of the vision's fire, chaos, a fractured sky, and how they'd shifted in that final moment to fields of maize, rivers flowing clean, a harmony between earth and stars. Quetzalcoatl hadn't returned as a conqueror or a captive, but as a guide, his power diffused into the wind that now rustled the agave plants. The order was shattered, Reyes in custody, his dreams of domination buried with the mirror's fragments. But Elena knew others might rise, fanatics, scholars, seekers drawn to the Codex's whispers. The story wasn't over. It was evolving. Doc, what's next? Miguel called, his grin tired but real. Back to UCLA? Write a paper? Hide in a cave? She laughed, a sound that felt like release. We share this carefully, not to control it, but to learn from it. The world's ready for a new story. Citlali looked up, her hawkish eyes softening. And the serpent? He's out there, Elena said, glancing at the sky, where a faint shimmer lingered a feather on the wind. Not gone, just free, like us. Shu stood, the incense smoke curling upward, a bridge between earth and ether. The elders were wrong to fear him, and the order was wrong to chain him. You found the middle path, Elena. That's strength. She smiled, her chest light despite the scars physical and otherwise. The Codex wasn't a curse or a weapon, it was a mirror, reflecting humanity's capacity to destroy or heal. They'd chosen the latter, not out of weakness, but wisdom. The valley stretched before them, ancient and alive, its secrets no longer burdens but gifts. Quetzalcoatl's legacy wasn't domination, it was renewal, a chance to rebuild what time had torn apart. As the truck rumbled to life, carrying them back to San Juan, Elena leaned against the tailgate, watching Tula fade into the horizon. The wind carried a soft hiss, not a threat, but a song, and she knew they'd done more than survive. They'd planted a seed, a fragile, beautiful thing, for a world that could still grow.